I'm a 28-year-old man, and my name is Dorian. I don't usually share things online, but the way my family treated me over the past year feels like something you'd only believe if you read it in a place like this. It's not a quick story. It's the kind of slow unraveling that happens over years until one day everything snaps. For context, my dad's name is Bram. He's 56 now, but to me, he's always felt older than that. Strict, cold, someone who thought emotions were a weakness. My mom, Helena, passed away when I was 15, and after that, it was just him and me in the house. That's also when Calder entered the picture more heavily. Calder is my cousin, only 2 years older than me, but he somehow became the son my dad always wanted. When we were kids, Calder and I were inseparable. Summers at my grandmother's farm, building tree houses, trading comic books, it was the kind of bond you think will last forever. But by the time we reached our late teens, Calder had changed. Or maybe he just started showing who he really was. He realized Dad favored him, and instead of deflecting the attention, he leaned into it. If Calder got a good grade, Dad made sure I heard about it. If Calder landed a job, Dad told me. That's what a young man with ambition looks like. Every accomplishment of mine was either dismissed or twisted into some backhanded comparison. I once came home from college with an award from one of my professors, and Bram's response was, "That's nice, but Calder's already doing real work." Calder stood there, smiling faintly, as if it wasn't enough to succeed. He needed me to know I was beneath him. By my early 20s, Calder was working for Bram's small contracting company. Dad ran it like his life depended on it. He had dreams of passing it down, but not to me. I tried once, offered to help with bookkeeping, marketing, things I had some skill in, but Dad waved me off. He wanted Calder on job sites, learning real work. He didn't say it outright, but the message was clear. Calder was the heir, and I was a guest in their world. So I built my own path. I went into hospitality and started working in hotels, climbing from front desk to assistant manager. I didn't brag about it, but I was proud. It wasn't glamorous, but I had independence, stability, and I was good at it. None of that mattered to Bram. Every family gathering was an opportunity to remind me that Calder was already building something, while I was just working for someone else. It wore me down. You'd think after so many years of comparisons I'd be numb, but the truth is, when it's your only parent left, you keep hoping one day they'll see you. They never did. By the time I was 27, I was still living at home. Not because I was irresponsible, far from it. Rent was brutal, and I wanted to save enough to move out comfortably. I had a plan, one more year, and I'd have enough tucked away to get my own place without struggling. Bram knew this, or at least I thought he did. Then came the night everything cracked. It was late September, just after a grueling shift. I pulled into the driveway, headlights catching something strange on the porch. My heart sank when I realized what I was seeing: boxes, bags, and piles of my clothes. Some neatly stacked, some just tossed like garbage. A few jackets had slipped into the dirt, and there they were. Bram, arms crossed, standing rigid in the doorway. Next to him, Calder, leaning casually against the railing with that smug tilt of his mouth that I'd grown to hate. I froze in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. I wanted to believe I was mistaken, that maybe they were moving something, reorganizing, anything but what it looked like. But the truth was undeniable. I'd been packed up and placed outside like I didn't belong. When I finally opened the car door, Bram didn't hesitate. His voice was steady, cold, almost rehearsed. "It's time to grow up, Dorian." Calder didn't say anything, but his eyes flickered with amusement. He looked like he was enjoying every second of this. I stood there, my mouth dry, trying to process. I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't behind on bills. I wasn't lazing around. I was saving, working long hours, building towards something. Yet here I was, being treated like a child overstaying his welcome. I didn't argue. I didn't pick up the clothes. Something inside me shut down. I locked my car, slid back inside, and drove away without another word. That was 7 months ago. Since then, I've built a new routine. Found a small apartment, kept my head down, and focused on work. It hasn't been easy, but it's been freeing. I told myself I didn't need them, that cutting ties was the only way forward. But yesterday, that resolve cracked. I was midway through my shift when my manager pulled me aside. She looked uneasy, like she wasn't sure how to phrase it. "Dorian," she said, "there's someone waiting for you in the lobby." When I stepped out, my chest tightened. It was Bram. He wasn't with Calder this time. He looked older somehow, shoulders heavy, but his eyes were sharp, searching. He didn't waste a second. "Son," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I froze for a moment, the lobby lights glaring off the polished floor as Bram's words echoed in my ears. "We need to talk." It was such a simple sentence, but the weight behind it felt like a hammer. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the subtle set of his jaw, but I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of looking vulnerable. Not after 7 months of silence, not after the porch, not after Calder. I took a deep breath and kept my expression neutral. "I'm working," I said, trying to keep my tone steady, though my stomach nodded. "I don't have time for." "I know you're busy," he interrupted, voice even but firm. "I won't take long. Just a moment, in private. Please." There was an insistence in his tone that didn't feel like concern. It felt like a trap. Bram had a way of presenting himself as reasonable while the underlying message was anything but. I'd learned to read him over the years. I could feel the old patterns creeping in, the manipulations, the subtle power plays, the way Calder had learned to mirror them. I glanced around the lobby, then at my manager, who was still hovering a few feet away, unsure. I nodded, not because I wanted to talk to him, but because confrontation, at least on my terms, seemed better than avoiding him and letting him escalate. We moved to a small conference room adjacent to the lobby. He sat down across from me, hands clasped tightly in front of him, eyes scanning me as if he were calculating the perfect approach. Bram had always had this habit of studying people, not in a casual way, but like a chess master examining every possible move before striking. "Dorian," he began, voice smooth, "I know things didn't end well last time, but I've been thinking. We're family, and families should talk. There are things you need to understand." I folded my arms, leaning back in my chair. "Understand? What exactly am I supposed to understand? That you treat me like I'm a problem? That Calder gets everything handed to him while I get a pile of my own clothes on the porch?" He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just stared at me, cool and measured. "It's not about handing anything to anyone. You've always had opportunities, Dorian. Calder and I, we just see things differently. You've chosen a path that doesn't align with how I think a man should live. I was trying to motivate you, to make you realize." "Motivate me?" I cut in sharply. "You call dumping my clothes in the dirt motivation? You call making me feel worthless in my own home motivation?" My voice was quieter now, controlled, but each word cut like glass. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, eyes locked onto mine. "I've never said it would be easy. You think life is going to hand you anything without hard work? Calder gets results because he's willing to put himself through discomfort, through challenges. You've been soft, too comfortable with excuses. You've had a safe place here, and you didn't appreciate it." I felt my chest tighten. Bram had this way of twisting reality, so it sounded like a moral lesson. Calder had gotten results because he played their game, because he leaned into Bram's favoritism. I had carved out my own life, my own successes, and yet suddenly I was the one at fault. "I've been working every day for years," I said slowly. "I've built something of my own. I'm not sitting on the porch expecting handouts. I'm not competing for your approval because I don't need it." Bram's expression hardened ever so slightly. "You think that's enough? You think independence is proof that you're succeeding? Life isn't about feeling satisfied, Dorian. It's about ambition. And Calder understands that in a way you don't. That's why you need guidance. That's why Guidance," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Is that what you call turning your own son into a doormat so your favorite cousin can walk all over him? You've spent years comparing us, belittling me in front of him, showing me I'm never enough. And now you act like you're some kind of wise mentor?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back, letting the silence stretch. I could feel the shift in energy. Bram's calm demeanor was the mask of someone used to controlling situations. I had seen it for years. He was the kind of man who could make you doubt yourself simply by staying silent and staring at you long enough. "Finally," he said, quietly, "I didn't make Calder your enemy. He's just better suited for certain paths. You've had your choices, and you've made them. But you need to accept that life doesn't always go the way you want." That line hit me like a punch. "So your excuse is that he's naturally better than me? That's why you treated me like dirt. 7 months, Bram. 7 months I've gone without talking to you, without seeing Calder, and now you want me to just accept that he's better?" He held my gaze, unmoved. I'm not saying better. I'm saying different. You need to see the bigger picture. You need to grow up, Dorian. I sat back, anger and disbelief mixing with something else. Fear, maybe. Fear of the way Bram could manipulate situations, of how long he had been doing this, of how carefully he had set everything up so that Calder always came out ahead. The truth hit me like a slow-moving storm. I had underestimated just how deep the favoritism went and how much Bram relied on it to control both of our lives. Then he leaned in again, voice dropping to a quiet, almost conspiratorial tone. That's why I came here today. We can't just ignore the situation anymore. There are things you need to see and understand before it's too late. My stomach sank. I could feel the air in the room thicken, heavy with the weight of his intentions. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about family. Bram's carefully chosen words, his calm tone, his measured approach, it all reeked of strategy. And Calder. I realized then that he wasn't just a favored cousin. He had been groomed, intentionally, to be Bram's instrument. I wanted to stand, to walk away, but something inside me made me stay. I needed to hear him out, if only to know the full scope of whatever plan they had crafted. I needed to understand the enemy I'd been living with my entire life. Bram's eyes held mine, unwavering, as if daring me to question him further. And in that moment, I understood clearly. The confrontation wasn't over. In fact, it had barely begun. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that signals calculation rather than warmth. Dorian, what I'm about to show you, it might be hard to take. But I need you to listen carefully. Everything that's happened, it's been leading to this moment. And then he slid a folder across the table toward me, thick and heavy with papers. My hand hovered over it, knowing instinctively that whatever was inside would change everything. I swallowed hard. What is this? I asked, though part of me already feared the answer. Bram's smile widened, faint and chilling. Proof. Proof that choices have consequences. That sometimes, the people you think you can trust aren't really on your side. My pulse quickened. I realized then that this wasn't just a conversation. This was the opening move in a game I hadn't agreed to play, and the stakes were higher than I could have imagined. I picked up the folder, my hands trembling slightly. Bram leaned back, eyes glinting with satisfaction, and said, almost casually, "You're going to want to look at every page. And when you do, you'll understand why I had to act the way I did." I opened the first sheet. The ink was dense, full of numbers, contracts, and notes written in Bram's precise hand. My stomach twisted. I recognized some of the details immediately. They were things I'd thought were private, things I hadn't shared with anyone outside work. And yet, here they were, carefully documented, arranged as though to prove some point I hadn't realized was being made all these years. I froze, looking up at him. Where did you even get this? Bram's expression didn't change. I've always kept track of things, Dorian. Things that matter. You should have known that family isn't always kind. Sometimes it's the only way to survive. I leaned back, heart hammering, the reality setting in slowly. This wasn't going to be just a conversation. This was a trap, a carefully orchestrated confrontation, and Bram and Calder had been playing this game for years. And now, I was sitting right in the middle of it. I stared at the folder, feeling my pulse thrum in my ears. The first page alone made my stomach knot. It wasn't just numbers or contracts. It was a detailed account of my life, meticulously tracked. Expenses, paychecks, work performance, even small notes about conversations I'd had at work and at home. Everything I had considered private was there, neatly typed or scrawled in Bram's precise handwriting. And interspersed among the pages were references to Calder, his successes, his investments, the way Bram had elevated him above me for years. I turned the page slowly, my fingers trembling. Each sheet added a layer of clarity to what I had suspected but never fully admitted. Bram and Calder had been playing a game for years, and I'd been the unwitting piece. You've been keeping track of all this, why? My voice was calm, but my chest felt tight. Bram leaned back, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. Because, Dorian, you need to see patterns to understand consequences. Life isn't fair, and I wanted you to learn that before it was too late. Calder understood it quickly. You not so much. I swallowed, my mind racing. This is manipulation. Plain and simple. You've been using him against me my entire life. He shook his head, still calm. No, Calder isn't the problem. He's an ally in understanding how the world works. You, however, you've been unwilling to see reality. That's why the porch incident happened. Not because I don't care for you, but because you needed a wake-up call. You were comfortable, stagnant. And now, look where you are. I felt a chill run down my spine. Comfortable? I've been working 12, sometimes 14 hours a day to save, to build a life separate from this house. And what? I get my clothes thrown on the porch while Calder gets praised for every little thing he does? That's your idea of a wake-up call. Bram didn't flinch. He leaned forward, fingers steepled in front of him. I call it guidance. And this folder, it's part of that guidance. You're going to see just how much is at stake when you ignore lessons life is trying to teach you. I flipped through another few pages, and my stomach sank further. There were contracts I hadn't signed, but they bore my name in handwritten notes as if someone had outlined a hypothetical scenario for me. There were receipts, copies of emails, even performance reports from my hotel that Bram somehow had access to. It was unsettling, frightening even, but beneath the unease was a growing clarity. Bram had been orchestrating events not to support me, but to control me. And Calder? I asked, my voice quiet now. Where does he fit into all this? Bram's gaze sharpened. He's always been the lens through which you could understand success. He's a reflection of what focus and ambition look like. You've been unwilling to see it. You've wasted opportunities by being soft, Dorian. Calder wasn't the favorite. He was the example. And perhaps you needed to see that example pushed to the forefront so you could recognize your own shortcomings. The words stung, but I couldn't let the anger fully take over. I had to think, to process. So you've been planning all of this for years. Not helping me. Not teaching me. Planning. Bram nodded slowly. Planning. Correct. Life isn't about sentimentality, Dorian. It's about preparing for consequences. And now, you're at a crossroads. You can either continue down the path of complacency, or you can take the lessons offered and adjust accordingly. I slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing in the small conference room. Adjust? You're insane. You've been manipulating me my entire life. You treated me like dirt, rewarded Calder for everything, and now you're sitting here pretending it was all for my benefit? Bram's expression hardened, but only slightly. His calm control was unnerving. You misunderstand. This isn't about pretending. This is reality. The real world doesn't apologize for fairness. People get what they earn or take. Calder earned your place because he understood that early. You haven't. I felt a surge of defiance. I don't need your approval. I've built my life without it. You and Calder. This isn't guidance. This is cruelty masked as a lesson. You're villains, Bram. Both of you. You've been plotting and scheming for years under the guise of family, and I'm done pretending otherwise. He leaned back, exuding a patience that felt like a trap. Villains? Perhaps in your eyes. Or perhaps protectors. Sometimes what we do isn't understood until later. But you will understand soon enough, Dorian. You'll see why these actions were necessary. And you'll see what you've risked by thinking independence equals success. My hands gripped the edge of the table. The folder sat there between us like a wedge, a symbol of years of calculated manipulation. Bram's calm demeanor, Calder's smug influence, the constant comparisons, they all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. I had been carefully controlled, measured, and maneuvered in ways I hadn't fully realized until now. Look, Bram continued, leaning forward again, his voice lowering to a measured, almost conspiratorial tone. What I'm showing you isn't just past mistakes or history. It's evidence. Evidence that every choice you make, every path you follow, carries consequences. Some of which you haven't begun to see yet. I swallowed hard. There was a part of me that wanted to storm out, to never look back, to walk away from this twisted web of family control. But another part of me knew I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to see how far this went. I needed to understand the full scope of Bram and Calder's designs before I made my move. Bram leaned back again, his eyes glinting with satisfaction. You'll need to go through it carefully, Dorian. Every page, every note. And when you do, you'll understand why I had to act the way I did. And why Calder has always been positioned where he is. I opened the folder again, hesitant, heart pounding. The first few sheets were enough to make my head spin, but as I turned page after page, the extent of their planning became horrifyingly clear. Bram had mapped out not only my life, but the interactions between Calder and me, anticipating responses, predicting failures, and manipulating outcomes. Every slight, every comparison, every subtle undermining had been deliberate. I leaned back in my chair, breathing shallow, mind racing. All of this, years of planning for what? Control? Power. Bram's gaze held mine steadily. To prepare you. To teach you. Life doesn't hand lessons on a silver platter. You have to earn them. Or survive them. Calder survived. You have yet to see if you can. I felt something in me shift, a mix of fear, anger, and determination. For the first time, I realized that this confrontation was not about family reconciliation. It was about strategy, manipulation, and a test I hadn't agreed to take. Bram and Calder weren't just obstacles, they were opponents. And the folder, heavy with years of calculated observation and meticulous planning, was the starting line of a game I hadn't wanted to play, but now it had been forced upon me. I leaned forward, flipping to another section of the folder, and froze. There were plans, projections, financial moves that implicated Calder in dealings I hadn't known about, and hints that Bram had been leveraging my work and choices in ways I couldn't yet fully grasp. My stomach churned as I realized the truth. This was bigger than petty favoritism, bigger than insults or comparisons. Bram had been building leverage over both Calder and me, testing loyalty, patience, and ambition. Every step I had taken in my life had been watched, analyzed, and logged. Every decision I had made, whether in my hotel work or personal life, had become a thread in Bram's carefully woven tapestry. I looked up at him, heart pounding, aware that the next words he spoke could define the path ahead. "So what now?" I asked quietly, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. Bram's small, controlled smile returned, colder now. "Now, Dorian, you understand. And soon, you'll realize why understanding is only the beginning." The room seemed to shrink around me, the weight of the folder and his presence pressing down like a physical force. I had walked in thinking this would be a simple conversation. I had no idea I was stepping into the middle of a decades-long design. And as I sat there, staring at the pages, I realized one undeniable truth. Bram and Calder weren't just family. They were architects of control, and I had just uncovered the blueprint. I spent the next few days in a daze, unable to shake the image of Bram leaning back in that conference room, folder in hand, the faint glint of satisfaction in his eyes. I knew I couldn't ignore him, couldn't pretend this confrontation hadn't happened. For the first time, I truly understood that Bram's actions weren't impulsive. They were methodical, calculated over years. Calder had been his instrument, Bram's favored pawn, positioned perfectly to demonstrate what he considered success. And I had been the shadow, the counterexample, the one whose mistakes were meticulously logged. I knew I had two options: remain passive and let them continue shaping my life from the shadows, or engage carefully, using the knowledge I now had as leverage. There was no other choice. The first step was gathering my own information. Bram had access to contracts, emails, financial details. If he could track me, I could track him. I started meticulously documenting everything: my work performance, pay stubs, my savings, and all interactions with Bram and Calder. I dug into the family business from the outside, reviewing public records, contractor permits, and business filings. It was slow, painstaking work, but every small piece I uncovered began forming a picture of how Bram and Calder operated together. One evening, I found a detail that made my blood run cold. A set of documents buried in public filings indicated that Calder had signed agreements that legally bound him to Bram's company in ways that were, frankly, restrictive. He could not sell, invest, or make independent decisions without Bram's approval. Calder had been painted as the golden success story, but in reality, Bram had him under complete control. I realized then that Bram's entire approach wasn't about lifting Calder up, it was about creating leverage over both of us. Calder had been groomed to believe he was independent while being tethered to Bram's plans. The knowledge gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: power. Bram had underestimated me, assumed that my detachment from the family business meant I was weak, that I was compliant. He had forgotten one thing: I didn't need their approval to build strength, and now I had insight they hadn't accounted for. I began crafting a plan, slow, deliberate, and invisible. I didn't rush. Bram and Calder were arrogant. They assumed control through intimidation, through the careful erosion of self-esteem. That made them predictable. I started by subtly expanding my influence within the hotel chain I worked for. I positioned myself as indispensable, quietly taking on responsibilities that no one else noticed until it was too late. I built networks, contacts, and credibility without calling attention to it. Bram would have dismissed the hotel as inconsequential compared to his contracting business, but he underestimated the way influence could accumulate quietly. Meanwhile, I fed Calder's ego indirectly. I reached out under the guise of reconciliation, asking him questions about the company, pretending curiosity and admiration. Calder, hungry for validation, obliged, giving away details about internal operations, upcoming bids, and weaknesses he considered trivial. Every word he spoke, every casual mention of Dad's plan, or this will make him proud, was fuel. I recorded everything, documented it meticulously, storing it safely away. I watched them both like a hawk. Bram called occasionally, always insisting we meet, always under the guise of concern. I declined politely, never revealing the extent of my preparations. Calder, in turn, continued flaunting his supposed superiority, oblivious to the fact that I was quietly amassing leverage in ways neither of them could predict. The real turning point came when I discovered Bram's next big project. He had been planning a major expansion of his contracting business, a risky venture that required significant financial commitment. He had also been subtly undermining Calder's autonomy in preparation, ensuring that the cousin remained dependent and malleable. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Bram had been orchestrating a multi-year strategy that placed Calder in the center while keeping me on the sidelines, a passive observer who could be punished at a moment's notice. That night, I reviewed my notes, the folder Bram had given me, and my own compiled evidence. I realized I had everything I needed to turn the tables. Bram's arrogance had left him blind to the subtle ways influence could shift, and Calder's overconfidence had left him vulnerable. Both were predictable, both manipulable. I didn't need brute force. I needed strategy, patience, and timing. I began reaching out to former clients of Bram's business, quietly checking contracts and past dealings. I spoke to people Calder and Bram considered friends or allies, all under the guise of casual networking. Each conversation revealed more weaknesses than I had anticipated. Bram's control relied heavily on perception. He needed people to believe Calder was the capable, independent heir, and that I was the inconsistent, complacent son. If perception shifted, the foundation of their control began to crumble. The first opportunity to act came unexpectedly. Bram had scheduled a meeting with Calder to finalize an upcoming bid, and through my network, I learned the meeting time, location, and participants. The details were perfect. Calder would be overconfident, Bram would assume control, and their combined arrogance would make them careless. I realized that with careful timing, I could introduce information that would destabilize them, make them question each other, and subtly insert myself as the only person capable of correcting the situation. The day of the meeting arrived. I positioned myself at a nearby cafe with a clear line of sight to the office. Using a mix of calls and discreet messages, I guided Calder to make assumptions that were false, feeding him small inaccuracies about the competition, about financing, and about potential risks. Bram, confident in Calder's capability, would not double-check these details. My goal was not to destroy Calder, at least not entirely, but to create just enough tension and doubt so that both he and Bram would be forced to consider me as the solution. I watched from the window as Calder presented the facts I had planted. He spoke confidently, unaware that every point was a thread in a web I had woven. Bram's brow furrowed slightly. For the first time, I saw hesitation, a break in his perfect control. I saw doubt flicker across Calder's face. The arrogance that had always defined them both was starting to crack. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I noticed every second of it. Their dynamic, once so carefully choreographed, was beginning to unravel. The more they questioned each other, the more I realized the depth of the advantage I had gained. They were trapped not by force, but by their own assumptions, the same assumptions they had used to manipulate me for years. By the end of the meeting, Bram and Calder emerged, visibly tense, exchanging curt words under their breath. Calder's usual smirk was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Bram, always the orchestrator, looked frustrated, his mind working furiously to regain control. From my vantage point, I allowed myself a small, internal smile. The first moves were mine. That night, I reviewed every detail again, plotting the next steps. Bram and Calder had underestimated me for too long, believing that my distance equaled weakness. They had not considered that I could observe, record, and manipulate in ways they never had to. Every document, every conversation, every carefully planted suggestion was another thread, another step toward dismantling the control they had exerted over my life for decades. And yet, I knew patience was key. I couldn't rush. Bram's manipulation was subtle, dangerous, and calculated. Calder, while less experienced, had absorbed Bram's lessons and could be unpredictable. Any mistake could expose me before the plan fully matured. I leaned back in my chair, folder and notes spread around me, a slow, deliberate calm settling over my mind. The first move had been made, the initial cracks appearing in the foundation they had so carefully constructed. But this was only the beginning. Bram and Calder were formidable opponents, but for the first time, I had the advantage. And I knew, without a doubt, that when the final moves were made, neither of them would see it coming. Over the next several months, I continued my careful approach, building influence quietly while letting Bram and Calder remain oblivious to the fact that the game had shifted. I never rushed anything. I didn't want emotion or arrogance to tip my hand. Every move I made was calculated, every word and action designed to subtly undermine their control without exposing myself too early. I began by leveraging the hotel chain connections I had cultivated. I started sending discreet, well-informed tips to contractors and clients that Bram and Calder considered allies. I highlighted weaknesses in their bids, pointed out overlooked regulations, and suggested better alternatives, always phrased as advice or caution. Bram, confident in his control over Calder and the family business, trusted the information without suspicion. Calder, eager to prove his competence, followed the suggestions blindly. The cracks deepened slowly. Contracts that Bram assumed would be easy to secure fell through unexpectedly. Calder made mistakes that, to anyone else, seemed minor, but Bram could see them as significant threats to their reputation. I watched from a distance as their carefully maintained confidence began to falter. Bram's voice lost some of its commanding certainty, and Calder's usual smirk started slipping more often than not. Then, one evening, I made my move. Bram and Calder had been preparing for a major bidding project, a multi-million-dollar city renovation. Both of them had invested heavily in resources and time, expecting success to be guaranteed. Using information I had gathered and refined over months, I subtly introduced a complication that would force them to overextend themselves financially while simultaneously making them appear incompetent to the city council overseeing the project. I sent a carefully crafted consultant report to Calder under the guise of a trusted advisor, highlighting supposed risks with one of Bram's subcontractors. Calder, eager to demonstrate independence, relayed the report to Bram without hesitation. Bram, convinced of his own oversight, overreacted, cutting corners elsewhere and second-guessing decisions he would normally make confidently. The fallout was immediate. The city council noticed inconsistencies in the paperwork, and Bram's company, long considered a safe bet, began losing credibility rapidly. Calder panicked when his own calculations were off, and he turned to Bram for guidance. Bram, furious and frustrated, started placing blame on everyone but himself. Their entire dynamic, once carefully choreographed, was unraveling in front of my eyes. I had prepared for this moment. I had kept meticulous records of their dealings, missteps, and manipulations, creating a comprehensive dossier that exposed not only their incompetence, but also how they had systematically manipulated and undermined me. When the opportunity arose, I contacted the city council directly, providing evidence of mismanagement, improper contracting practices, and conflicts of interest. I framed it professionally, letting facts speak for themselves. The council acted quickly. Bram's company lost several critical contracts, and his credibility in the industry took a hit he couldn't recover from overnight. Calder, humiliated in front of the people who had once admired him, realized too late that he had been a pawn in Bram's long game, and now in mine as well. The final confrontation came when Bram showed up at my apartment one evening, furious after learning about the lost contracts. He banged on the door, shouting for me to let him in. I didn't. I watched from the window as he stormed off when he realized there was no leverage left, no threats I would fall for. Calder never showed up. He was too busy trying to salvage his own reputation, which had been irreparably damaged by the revelations. By the end of the year, Bram's company had stabilized only minimally, heavily reliant on contractors and clients who had little confidence in their leadership. Calder, once the confident heir, had been sidelined completely. Meanwhile, I had quietly expanded my own influence, gaining respect and stability at the hotel chain, and using my growing reputation to network with people who mattered in my city. I never forgave Bram or Calder. They remained villains in my life, their manipulations exposed, their control dismantled. I kept my distance, but the sense of closure was immense. For the first time in my adult life, I had agency over my circumstances, free from the shadow of Bram's favoritism or Calder's smug superiority. I moved into a larger apartment, fully independent, and began planning long-term. The lessons Bram thought he was teaching me had been inverted. I had learned patience, observation, and strategy, and I had applied them to reclaim my life. Every move they had made to dominate me over the years had been cataloged, understood, and ultimately used against them. Now, when I see Bram and Calder at family gatherings, I remain distant, polite, but unyielding. The power they once held is gone, replaced by awareness on my part and caution on theirs. They know I have the knowledge and leverage to expose them at any moment, but I choose restraint, because the ultimate revenge was never destruction. It was taking control of my own life, demonstrating that I didn't need them to define my worth. The final situation is clear. Bram is still Bram, proud and manipulative, but powerless to harm me. Calder is still Calder, overconfident and bruised, learning that favoritism doesn't replace skill or judgment. And me? I'm Dorian, fully independent, strategically aware, and finally in control of my destiny. The family that once dictated my life now exists only on the periphery, powerless to shape the man I have become. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. When I showed up to my sister's graduation party, she looked me up and down and said, "Didn't expect you to crawl out of whatever hole you live in." Everyone laughed. My aunt whispered, "Some people just don't belong." My mom pretended not to know me. A week later, the secret I'd been keeping cracked their perfect image in half. Hi Reddit. I'm Eli, 40M, and this one's been sitting heavy on me for a while now. I've written and deleted this post about 4 times already, mostly because I don't want to sound dramatic or petty. But I also know that sometimes, when the truth gets ignored for too long, it starts growing sharp edges. And mine's been growing for years. Let me start from the beginning, or at least a piece of it. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. My siblings, in order, are Julia, 30F, Liam, 27M, and Sadie, 22F. We all grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, in the kind of neighborhood where everyone mows their lawn on Saturdays, hosts block parties in the summer, and goes to the same church on Sundays, whether they believe in anything or not. On the outside, we looked like the model family. We smiled for the holiday cards. We dressed nicely for school recitals. My mom, Marion, was heavily involved in the PTA and hosted every major family event in her special dining room no one was allowed to sit in unless it was Thanksgiving. My dad worked in insurance, quiet, methodical, distant in a way that didn't feel cold, just unreachable. But behind all that, things were more complicated. They usually are. From as far back as I can remember, I always felt like I was the odd one out. Not rebellious. Not troubled. Just different. I like quiet things. Books, old records, drawing. I wasn't outgoing like Julia, who had a natural charm even as a kid. I wasn't funny like Liam or bright-eyed like Sadie. I liked to be on my own, which was treated like a problem that needed fixing. Go outside and play with the others, Eli. Don't be weird. Why are you always in your head? You need to come out of your shell or no one's going to want you around. Stuff like that. Constant, subtle nudges that told me who I wasn't quite right. As I got older, it became clear that no matter what I didn't fit into the picture they had of what our family should be. I wasn't into sports. I didn't talk back, but I didn't agree with them, either. I didn't go to prom. I didn't go to church after sophomore year. I kept to myself and started working part-time jobs as soon as I could, just to have money of my own. I moved out at 17, just a month after graduation, with no fanfare and no real support. That was over 2 decades ago. Since then, I've lived a pretty quiet life. I work in graphic design, mostly freelance, and I rent a small place in a nearby town. I don't travel much. I don't post much online. I don't show up to family functions because, well, I usually find out about them through someone else. If at all, it didn't really bother me for a long time. I made peace with the fact that I was on the outside of the family. I told myself that not everyone's family stays close. Some drift, some fracture. I was okay being forgotten, or I thought I was. Then came Sadie's graduation. Now, I hadn't spoken to Sadie since she was maybe 15. She was the baby of the family, and the golden child from the minute she was born. Straight A student, captain of something, prom queen material. The kind of person who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. She and I never had a falling out. We just existed in totally different orbits. She was still in braces the last time I saw her in person. So when I found out about her college graduation party, it wasn't from a family text or a call. It was through Denny, an old family friend who used to live across the street when we were kids. I ran into him at a local bookstore. He was browsing the history section, and I was picking up a new sketchbook. We talked for a few minutes, mostly the small kind of talk people do when they haven't seen each other in 10 years. Then he said, "So, are you going to Sadie's party?" I paused. "What party?" "She's graduating from college this weekend. Big thing at your mom's house. Should be nice." My stomach turned, but I tried to keep my voice neutral. "No one told me about it." Denny looked confused. "Huh, I just assumed you'd be there." That was the first moment in a long time where I felt that old familiar sting, the one where you're reminded just how invisible you are to the people who are supposed to know you best. Still, I nodded politely, and we parted ways. But for the rest of the day, that conversation sat in my head like a rock in my shoe. That night, I sat on my couch and stared at the ceiling. I don't know what I was hoping for. A last-minute text. Some kind of message. An apology for forgetting. But nothing came. And against my better judgment, I decided to go anyway. I didn't tell anyone. I just figured, if they didn't want me there, I'd be able to tell pretty quickly, and I'd leave just as fast. So that Saturday, I put on my cleanest pair of slacks, a blue button-up, and the nicest shoes I owned. I even stopped at a little stationery shop and picked up a card with Sadie's school colors on it. I put a check inside, more generous than I probably should have, but I told myself it wasn't about the money. It was about showing up. The drive back to my childhood neighborhood was long, quiet. I passed the old diner where I used to sneak cherry sodas after school. I passed the middle school, now with a shinier sign and a new parking lot. The whole town looked familiar and strange all at once. When I pulled up to the house, I sat in the car for a full 10 minutes, just watching. There were at least 20 people in the backyard. Lawn chairs, folding tables with tablecloths, little lights strung along the fence. Everything looked perfect. My mother's version of perfect, anyway. I finally got out and walked up the path. That was the moment I saw Julia. She was standing near a table under a canopy, holding a plate and talking to a group of women who looked vaguely familiar, family friends, probably. As soon as her eyes landed on me, her eyebrows lifted. "Well," she said, loud enough for everyone near her to hear, "didn't expect you to crawl out of whatever hole you live in." A few people laughed. I paused, my hand still holding the card, and gave a short, awkward nod. "Hi, Julia. Did someone tell you this was a family thing?" she asked, tilting her head with a sweet but not really smile. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, someone behind her muttered, "Some people just don't belong." It was Aunt Marin. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. I glanced around, wondering if anyone would step in, but no one did. In fact, a few people had already turned away, like I was a waiter who'd wandered too close to the table. And then I saw her, my mother. She was walking across the yard, carrying a tray with those little shortbread cookies she always makes for parties. Her eyes met mine, and then, almost immediately, drifted past me, like she didn't recognize me, or like she had, and decided it was easier to pretend she hadn't. She didn't slow down, didn't blink, just kept walking. I stood there for a few more seconds, completely unsure of where to go or what to say. But I hadn't driven all that way for nothing. I turned and started toward the corner of the yard, where Sadie was holding court with a group of her college friends and what looked like her boyfriend. She looked good, confident, polished, glowing the way people do when everything in their life is going exactly how they planned it. When she saw me, she tilted her head and said, "Oh, you came." No smile, no hug, just that. Like I was a neighbor dropping by uninvited. I held out the card. "Congratulations," I said. She took it, glanced at it, and gave a little nod. "Thanks." Then she turned back to her conversation without another word. And just like that, I knew. I knew exactly where I stood with all of them. Exactly where I'd always stood. So I found a quiet spot near the back fence. Picked up a plate of food I didn't eat. Watched people laugh and take pictures. No one spoke to me. Not once. I left early. But what they didn't know, what they still don't know, is that I've been keeping something to myself. Something important. Something that doesn't just involve me. And after that day, I stopped keeping it. Because sometimes the only way people will hear you is if you make a sound loud enough to shake the walls they built to keep you out. And 1 week later, that sound hit them right where it hurt. I got a call from my mother. She didn't say hi. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, in a voice I hadn't heard in years, "What did you do?" The moment Mom said those words, "What did you do?" I knew whatever I was about to say would crack everything wide open. Her voice was sharp, almost accusing, but underneath it was fear. Fear I hadn't heard from her in a long time. I hesitated before answering. For a second, I thought maybe I should have stayed silent, kept the secret locked away forever. But whatever twisted version of justice was rising inside me told me I couldn't. I didn't do anything. Yet, I told her, "But I'm done being invisible, Mom. I'm done pretending everything is fine when it's not." There was a pause on the other end. Then she sighed, long and slow, like she was carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. "Eli, this isn't the time. You need to stop stirring the pot." I could hear her moving in the background, probably pacing, or maybe standing frozen like I was. "Mom, I'm coming home tomorrow. We need to talk. All of us." She didn't respond for a long time. Then she finally said, "Don't come here if you're going to make trouble." That was the moment I realized this was more than just the usual family distance. This was a line drawn in the sand. I hung up, my heart pounding. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I showed up at their front door just as the sun was setting and casting long shadows over the perfectly manicured lawn. The door was answered by Liam. He looked the same, a slick hair, expensive jacket, that grin that was charming on some days and infuriating on others. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw me. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not bothering with a hello. I told Mom I was coming. "We need to talk." "All of us," I said. Liam scoffed and stepped aside, like he was letting a stray dog into the house. "She's not home." I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting to be met with resistance. So I walked in anyway. The house smelled the same, lemon cleaner, fresh flowers, and something else. Something cold. I heard muffled voices coming from the living room. I peeked in and saw Mom sitting stiffly on the couch, Julia next to her clutching a throw pillow, Sadie nervously twisting the hem of her dress. Liam stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching me like I was a dangerous animal. Their faces were all the same, tense, wary, waiting for me to say or do something that would justify their wariness. I took a deep breath and sat down on the chair opposite them. "Look," I started slowly. I didn't come back to cause a scene. But I've been carrying something for a long time. Something I think you all deserve to know. Julia shot me a look, sharp and cold. "What could you possibly have that's worth all this drama, Eli?" I let that question hang in the air for a moment before answering. "It's about Dad," I said quietly. The room went completely silent. Mom's fingers tightened around the edge of the cushion. Sadie looked like she might cry. Liam just stared at me, face unreadable. He wasn't the man you all think he was. He wasn't the perfect husband or father. I saw Julia open her mouth, maybe to interrupt, but I raised my hand gently. "Please, just listen. This isn't to hurt you. It's just the truth." I told them what I'd found out over the last year. Things I'd kept buried because I wanted to protect them, or maybe protect myself. About Dad's secret meetings, his hidden debts, and the reason he really left us the house and the insurance money. Not because he loved us, but because he was trying to cover up a mess that was about to explode. Julia's face twisted with anger. "You're lying. You just want to drag Dad's name through the mud." Mom stood up suddenly, voice shaking. "How dare you bring this up here? After everything we've been through?" Sadie started to cry quietly. Liam's jaw clenched. "We don't want to hear this." But I wasn't done. "This is the reason I left," I said. "Because I couldn't live in a house built on lies. And now that you know the truth, you have a choice. You can keep pretending everything's perfect, or you can face it." Julia laughed bitterly. "You think you're some kind of hero? Coming back after all these years to ruin us?" "No," I said softly. "I just want you to stop pretending I don't exist." At that moment, Aunt Marin appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, as sharp as ever. I've always said it, she whispered loudly enough for the room to hear. Some people just don't belong. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me. This was about the entire family's foundation, the lies, the secrets, the careful control Mom and Aunt Marin had built to keep everything perfect. Aunt Marin's words hung in the air like a cold fog. Some people just don't belong. They weren't just an insult aimed at me. They were the whispered truth that had shaped everything I'd been through. Mom looked at Aunt Marin, then back at me. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before, a flicker of something fierce and dangerous. Not motherly love, not regret, but pure, unyielding control. This family doesn't need to be dragged through the mud by a man who left years ago and now thinks he can come back and rewrite history, Mom said, voice low but steady. Julia was nodding, eyes burning. Sadie wiped at her cheeks but didn't say anything. Liam stayed silent, his jaw tight, but I could see the tension in his posture. I realized, then, this wasn't just about my story or Dad's mistakes. This was about power, the power Mom and Aunt Marin had wielded for years. The power to decide who belonged and who didn't. You've all built this illusion, I said quietly. A perfect family, a perfect story. But it's built on lies. And those lies are about to unravel. Mom's face hardened. You don't get to come back and tear us apart. You abandoned us. I shook my head. I didn't abandon anyone. I left because I was being pushed out. Because every time I showed up, I was made to feel less than family. Like I was a problem to be hidden. Julia scoffed. You're playing the victim now? I'm telling you the truth, I said. And I have proof. That's when I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. The room went colder. Mom's fingers twitched. Julia's eyes widened. Sadie gasped softly. I laid the envelope on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were documents, emails, even photos, things I'd gathered over the last year, quietly. Things that showed Dad's hidden debts, the secret meetings he'd had with a man none of us knew, and letters from lawyers threatening foreclosure on the house. Evidence that the perfect life Mom claimed to keep us safe from had been crumbling for years. Mom's eyes flickered with panic for the first time. Julia's face paled. Liam looked away, jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might break. This isn't real, Mom whispered. You fabricated this. No, I said. It's all real. And you hid it. You kept everyone in the dark so that no one would question you. You controlled the narrative. Aunt Marin stepped forward, voice cold and sharp. You have no idea what you're talking about, Eli. We did what we had to do. To protect this family. Protect? I echoed. By pretending everything was fine while the whole house was sinking? Julia's face twisted with rage. You're trying to destroy us. For what? Because you're jealous. I shook my head again. I'm trying to make you see the truth. Before it's too late. Mom's eyes narrowed. You're just like your father. A troublemaker. Always were. That hit harder than I expected. But I didn't let it stop me. I'm nothing like him, I said. I'm just tired of being erased. Tired of being the villain in a story I never got to tell. Sadie looked at me then, really looked, like she was trying to understand something new about me. But Julia and Liam's expressions said they already made up their minds. You should leave, Julia said finally, voice cold and final. Before this gets worse. But I didn't move. After Julia's cold dismissal, I stayed put. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. I looked around that pristine living room, the place I'd grown up in, the place where smiles were carefully arranged but never quite reached the eyes, and I realized something important. They thought they had all the power. They thought that by pretending I didn't exist, by whispering about me behind closed doors, by twisting the story of our family, they could keep their perfect image intact forever. They were wrong. I spent the next few days quietly piecing together more evidence. I reached out to old acquaintances, dug through public records, and quietly confirmed things Dad had tried to hide, things Mom and Aunt Marin desperately wanted buried. The debts weren't just financial. There were contracts signed under false names, shady business deals that could ruin their reputation if anyone found out. But I knew exposing those secrets in a loud, explosive way wouldn't work. It would just give them more ammunition to paint me as the angry, estranged brother, trying to sabotage their lives. No, this had to be smarter. Slow. Calculated. I started small. I called the mortgage company under the guise of being a concerned family member. I asked about the status of the loans tied to the house, the interest rates, if any payments had been missed. They told me the mortgage was in serious trouble. Payments had been missed for months. That was the first crack in their perfect facade. Next, I contacted the local community center where Mom had been fundraising for the upcoming holiday gala. They told me she had been quietly removed from the organizing committee after a dispute over funds. Not many people knew that. Every conversation, every phone call, I kept careful records. Then I began planting seeds. At Sadie's new job, where she'd proudly mentioned the family name was well respected, I quietly contacted a colleague I'd met once. I didn't say much, just dropped hints about the family's financial instability and the recent rumors swirling around Mom's leadership in the community. Word travels fast in small towns. One evening, I got a text from an unknown number. Your sister's work is feeling the heat. Might want to be careful. I smiled. Meanwhile, I started sending anonymous tips to local reporters about the inconsistencies in the family's public persona, the gala scandal, the mortgage troubles, Dad's past debts. Nothing overt. Just enough to raise questions. At the same time, I quietly met with a lawyer about the house deed. Turns out, some of the paperwork Mom had signed years ago wasn't as airtight as she thought. There were clauses that, if challenged, could invalidate the way the property was currently held. The goal wasn't just to threaten them with exposure. It was to make them feel the pressure that I'd lived under for years, the feeling of instability, the fear that the life they build on lies might collapse. The final step came when I reached out to Julia's employer. Julia, who had always been so sure of her social standing and perfect image, was suddenly facing questions about her family background. I sent them a carefully worded letter, not accusing but simply providing information about the ongoing financial and legal troubles. It wasn't long before Julia started getting cold shoulders at work, invitations stopped coming, and whispers began behind her back. And through it all, Mom called twice. Both times I ignored her. Aunt Marin, I heard through the grapevine, was furious and blaming everyone but herself. Family friends started distancing themselves, unsure who to trust. Sadie? I don't know exactly what happened to her, but she stopped posting on social media and, last I heard, she was looking for a new job. One evening, as I sat alone in my small apartment, I got a message from Liam. It was short, but it said more than any words ever could. We need to talk. Face to face. I stared at Liam's message for a long time. The simple words, we need to talk. Face to face. Felt like a trap wrapped in a desperate plea. I knew better than to rush into whatever game they were playing, but part of me also craved the chance to see their faces when everything I'd uncovered finally came out. I agreed to meet, but on my terms. We settled on a quiet cafe halfway between their neighborhood and mine, a neutral place where they couldn't summon Aunt Marin's army or Mom's reputation to sway the crowd. When I arrived, Liam was already there, sitting stiffly at a small table near the window. He looked older, wearier, like the weight of keeping up the family's image had finally started to press on him. But his eyes still held a cold edge. Eli, he said, not rising, I'll be honest. None of us wanted this. We just wanted peace. I smiled a little. Peace? By pretending I was dead to you? By twisting the story so I was the villain? He shifted uncomfortably. You don't understand what we've been dealing with. I don't. I leaned forward. I've lived on the outside watching you all keep this house of cards standing while everything underneath was rotting. He frowned. Look, Mom's done a lot to keep us afloat. You think it's easy to hold this family together? After Dad left, after the debts, the scandals, you have no idea. Oh, I have an idea, I said quietly. Which is why I've been making sure your little secrets aren't so secret anymore. Liam's face tightened. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed him a news article. The headline was subtle. Local charity gala faces questions over missing funds. I watched as his eyes flicked over the screen, disbelief mixing with anger. That wasn't me, he said quickly. Mom's trying to fix things. Trying or covering up? He shook his head. This family has suffered enough. You coming back and stirring up the past isn't helping. Neither is pretending the past doesn't exist, I said. Or pretending the debts and lies will just go away if we ignore them. Liam looked away, jaw tight. What do you want, Eli? What's the endgame? I took a deep breath. I want you all to feel what it's like to live under the weight of secrets. To feel powerless. Because that's what I felt. That's what Dad left behind. He scoffed. You think this makes you some kind of hero? No, I said. I'm not a hero. I'm someone who's been invisible for too long. And now, I'm making sure the family knows I exist, and that their perfect story isn't perfect at all. Liam's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at me. They want me to get out of this meeting. Who's are they? I asked. Mom, Aunt Marin, Julia. They're scared. And angry. They don't want this to get worse. I nodded slowly. Good. Maybe it's time they learned how to live with a little fear. He looked at me for a long moment, then stood abruptly. This isn't over. As he walked away, I realized it was exactly the kind of promise I wanted to hear. In the days that followed, the family's world started unraveling faster than I expected. I got a call from a former business partner of Mom's who confirmed what I already suspected. The gala funds weren't just mishandled. They were deliberately redirected to cover debts Mom and Aunt Marin had been hiding. Julia's work troubles deepened, with more colleagues questioning her background. Sadie's silence turned into avoidance. She stopped answering calls altogether. And Mom? She stopped returning messages entirely. The house that once seemed impenetrable was cracking, piece by piece. I knew the final move had to be undeniable, something that would force them out of their comfortable bubble and make the whole community see the cracks in their perfect facade. I gathered everything into one clear, undeniable package: the financial documents, the emails proving the misdirection of gala funds, the legal irregularities surrounding the house, and the string of messages proving their attempts to isolate me and maintain control by keeping the family's true story hidden. I sent it all, anonymously, to the local newspaper, the city's financial oversight board, and even to Julia's employer. The story exploded faster than I imagined. Within days, the charity gala was under official investigation. The community that once praised my mother's leadership was now filled with murmurs of betrayal. Julia's career stalled as her company launched an internal review. Sadie, overwhelmed and isolated, finally broke contact with the family altogether, moving out of town to start fresh somewhere no one knew her name. Mom's carefully crafted empire began to crumble. The house, once the symbol of their success and control, was facing foreclosure. The local mortgage company started the legal process, and the news of debts and mismanagement spread. Aunt Marin, who had always been the shadow behind their operations, retreated completely, avoiding calls and social events, her reputation quietly tarnished. The family gathering stopped. Invitations vanished. Phone calls were left unanswered. I never expected them to apologize or admit wrongdoing. That was never the point. They had spent years pretending I was the problem, casting me out, and building their version of a perfect family on lies and control. I showed them the truth, piece by piece, and watched the foundation collapse under its own weight. Now, I live with the peace that comes from no longer being invisible, no longer being the ghost in their stories. I'm not part of their perfect picture anymore, and I don't want to be. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed silent, kept the secret, and let the family pretend forever. But then I remember the feeling I had when I stood in that living room, looking at their faces, the power shifting, the control slipping away. That was the moment I took back my life. They lost a family member. I found my freedom.
When their family decided that Grandma was too much of a burden to bring to Thanksgiving, they didn't think twice about leaving her behind. But one person refused to let that happen. Instead of going along with the plan, they made a choice, one that would change everything. Now the family is furious, tensions are high. Listen to this story and decide for yourself. Was it the right thing to do, or a mistake that tore the family apart?
Hi, I, 28 female, need some perspective because I'm feeling really conflicted about something that happened this Thanksgiving, and I'm not sure if I overstepped. This year, Thanksgiving was a bit of a mess in my family, and I ended up spending it with my grandma, which has made everyone really upset. So here's the background. My family is generally pretty close, but this year, things got weird. Every Thanksgiving, my aunt, 41, hosts the big family dinner. We usually have a huge spread of food and everyone pitches in. There's lots of chaos in the kitchen, the kids run around, and we just all hang out and catch up. It's always loud, crowded, and kind of messy, but it's a tradition and I love it. The problem is, my grandma, 82, has been in a nursing home for about 2 years now. Her health has been declining, and while she's doing okay overall, she's not as mobile as she used to be. My aunt has always been the one to plan the Thanksgiving dinner, and for the past few years, Grandma hasn't really been included much. The first year, they said it was too hard to bring her because of her health, and after that, it just became a thing that she stayed in the nursing home while the rest of us went to the family dinner. No one really questioned it, and honestly, I didn't think too much of it either, even though it always felt a little wrong to me. This year, however, it hit me harder. I spoke with Grandma on the phone a few days before Thanksgiving, and she casually mentioned that she didn't have any plans for the holiday. She said she'd probably just spend the day in her room at the nursing home, watching TV and napping. She sounded fine, but I could tell she was a little sad about it. I asked if she had any plans with the other residents or if anyone was coming to visit her, and she said no, It was just going to be another quiet day. I couldn't get that out of my mind. I mean, Thanksgiving is supposed to be about family, right? And I couldn't stand the idea of Grandma being all alone while everyone else was together, having a feast. I felt like I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. So I decided to talk to my mom, 53, about it. I said, "What if we bring Grandma to the dinner this year? It's not that far from the nursing home, and we could make her comfortable." My mom kind of brushed me off, saying that it would be too much for Grandma, and that she wouldn't want to be a burden. My aunt was even more dismissive when I brought it up to her. She said, "It's just easier if Grandma stays where she is. It's too complicated to bring her here." I understand that they were probably trying to make things easier for themselves, but I just couldn't accept that. I kept thinking about how Grandma has spent so many holidays alone, and how this could be her last few years with us. I decided to take matters into my own hands. The morning of Thanksgiving, I drove to the nursing home by myself, without telling anyone. I packed up a little bag for Grandma, grabbed her favorite blanket, and brought her some snacks she liked. When I arrived, I told her I had a little surprise and that we were going to have our own private Thanksgiving. She was a little confused at first, but I could tell she was touched when I explained what I had planned. I drove her to my apartment, which isn't too far from the nursing home, and we spent the day just the two of us. I didn't cook a big feast or anything, just a small dinner with some takeout from her favorite local diner. I set up the table, played some soft music, and even found an old Thanksgiving movie that she used to love. We didn't have a ton of food, but we had a ton of time together. We talked about old memories, laughed, and just had a nice, quiet day. It wasn't the big family Thanksgiving everyone else had, but it felt special to me, and especially to Grandma. She kept saying how nice it was to just relax and enjoy the day without the chaos. She even told me it was the best Thanksgiving she had in years. And honestly, that meant the world to me. But when I told my family, things went south pretty quickly. The first person I heard from was my aunt. She called me within an hour after I sent a quick text to the family, letting them know that I was spending Thanksgiving with Grandma instead of at the big dinner. I figured they'd be fine with it, but my aunt's voice was cold when she picked up the phone. "Why didn't you bring Grandma to the house like we always do?" she demanded. "We've been doing it this way for years, and now you just go behind our backs and make your own plans?" I was taken aback by her reaction. "I didn't want Grandma to be alone, Aunt Karen. I thought it'd be nice to spend the day with her, especially since no one else seemed to care about it." "Well, you're being selfish," she snapped. "You don't get to just decide that, especially when we were all planning on seeing her at the dinner. Now you've made a mess out of everything, and it's disrespectful to the rest of the family." Her words stung, but I tried to stay calm. I didn't think it was disrespectful. Grandma was happy. She said it was the best Thanksgiving she's had in a while. But Aunt Karen was already on a roll. "That's not the point. You've gone and made this all about you. You know Grandma wants to be with the family. You've upset the whole dynamic, and now people are pissed." She hung up before I could even respond. My heart sank as I thought about how I'd upset everyone by trying to make one person feel special. I figured maybe Aunt Karen was just upset in the moment, but then I started getting messages from my mom. She was angry too. The text I got was short and to the point. "Why did you do that? We had a plan, and now you've gone and made Grandma feel like she's not wanted by the family. You've really messed this up." I tried to explain again, but my mom didn't want to hear it. "You're being dramatic. Grandma didn't want to be a burden. You could have just brought her to the dinner, and she would have been fine. Now you've made her think she's some special guest instead of part of the family." I wasn't sure how to explain that I didn't mean to make Grandma feel singled out, but I honestly thought she'd enjoy the quiet day with just me. But it seemed like that was exactly what my mom and Aunt Karen didn't want. For me to make it personal. Then my cousin, Ben, 26, texted me with a similar vibe. He said, "You know, it wasn't your place to make that decision. You could have just dropped Grandma off with us and let her be part of the family. Now you've made this whole thing weird. Not everything needs to be this extra." At this point, I was really starting to feel like maybe I had done something wrong. I had thought I was doing the right thing by making Grandma feel included and valued, but the backlash from my family was overwhelming. I didn't even know what to say anymore. Part of me felt like I'd really messed up by stepping in, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I did what was right for Grandma. The drama didn't stop with just the initial phone calls and texts. It escalated quickly, And as I sat there trying to process everything, I could feel the tension building up with every new message I got from my family. Why Mom didn't stop at just one angry text. She called me later that evening, and her voice was sharp with frustration. I don't know why you feel the need to make everything about you, she said. This isn't your holiday to control. You're not the only one who cares about Grandma, you know? I felt like I had to defend myself. Mom, I wasn't trying to make it about me. I just didn't want Grandma to be alone. She's been in that nursing home for 2 years, and I haven't seen her smile like that in so long. She had a great time, and it wasn't about anyone else. It was just about making sure she felt loved. My mom wasn't buying it. Well, she feels loved by the family too. Do you know how much work we all put into planning Thanksgiving? It's not just about food. We all want to be together, and now you've made it so that nobody's happy. You've taken away the one thing that everyone looks forward to each year, being with Grandma. It felt like I was drowning in guilt. I didn't want to take anything away from the family. I just wanted to do something nice for Grandma. But my mom was relentless, and I couldn't seem to get through to her. But the worst part? My grandma didn't even realize how much of an issue this had become. When I told her that my family was upset, she was shocked. She thought I was joking at first. "Oh, honey, I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I just wanted to spend time with you. I thought it was lovely that we had our little Thanksgiving." It broke my heart a little. Grandma had no idea how much of a storm she'd unknowingly caused. I didn't want her to feel guilty about it. I reassured her, telling her it was all okay and that we just needed to wait for things to calm down. But then the real drama hit. The next day, my Aunt Karen and my mom called a family meeting, which, honestly, felt more like a confrontation. They wanted to talk about my actions, and they expected me to apologize. It was a Saturday, and they all showed up at my place, without giving me a heads up, by the way. I was already feeling the weight of the whole situation, but when I opened the door and saw the looks on their faces, I knew this was going to get ugly. "Why didn't you just leave well enough alone?" Aunt Karen asked, her arms crossed. "We've been doing this Thanksgiving thing for years, and now you've made it all about yourself. Grandma wasn't supposed to be the center of attention. We didn't want her to feel like a charity case." I tried to keep my voice steady. I didn't make her the center of attention. We had a small, quiet day. She enjoyed it. "Why does it matter so much if I didn't follow your plan this year?" My aunt shot back. "Because we've all been part of the plan for years. It's a family tradition, and you just can't break traditions like that. It's disrespectful." I felt like I was walking on eggshells, but I pushed on. I wasn't trying to break anything. I just didn't want her alone. She's old, she's lonely, and she's my family too. I just wanted her to know that we care. But my aunt wasn't having any of it. "You don't get to make those kinds of decisions for the rest of us. You made the family look divided, and now nobody is talking to each other because of you." I was on the verge of tears by that point, feeling completely overwhelmed. My mom jumped in, adding, "I'm just disappointed in you. We all had our plans, and you went and ruined it. Grandma's fine. She would have been fine at the dinner. But now you've made this whole thing into a personal statement." I shook my head, trying to hold it together. It wasn't a statement. It was a simple gesture. "You're all mad because I didn't go along with what you wanted, but maybe that's the problem. Maybe we need to rethink how we approach Thanksgiving, because if the holiday is really about family, why isn't Grandma part of that?" The silence in the room was thick. No one said anything for a while. Finally, Aunt Karen broke the silence with a muttered, "You've made this a bigger issue than it needed to be." That was when my uncle, 55, stepped in. He hadn't said much up to that point, but his face was tight with frustration. "Karen, let's just drop it. It's done. We can't change it now. But I'm not going to sit here and listen to this go on any longer. Everyone's upset, and you need to understand that you're not the only one with feelings in this family." There was a shift in the room when he spoke, but the tension was still unbearable. Everyone left shortly after that, and I was left feeling worse than before. The worst part? Grandma still didn't fully understand what happened. She just wanted to know why things had been so weird with the family. I could tell she felt awkward about it, but I couldn't explain without making her feel bad for enjoying the day. The aftermath of everything that happened hit harder than I expected. After that family meeting, It seemed like the tension never really went away. Everyone had gone their separate ways, but I could feel the distance in every conversation. The group chat my family had was dead quiet, save for a few texts about random things, but nothing about the Thanksgiving situation. My mom hadn't even called to check in on me, which was unusual for her. I wasn't used to the silence. Usually, I'd hear from at least one of them in the next few days. But this time, it felt like the cold shoulder. I was left wondering if I had really messed up. Was I too emotional about it? Maybe I was making a bigger deal out of it than I should have. Then, about 3 days later, I got a call from my cousin, Ben. To say it was unexpected would be an understatement. He was one of the quieter members of the family, but I'd always thought we got along pretty well. I picked up, and his voice was oddly soft for him. "Hey, I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving," Ben started. Sounding awkward, I didn't know where to go from there. So I just said, "I've been trying to make sense of everything, honestly." He was quiet for a beat before replying, "Listen, I'm not mad at you or anything. It just felt like, I don't know, like you took a big decision away from everyone. Grandma is important, but so is the rest of the family, you know? I think we were just frustrated that you didn't talk to us before making such a big call." I could tell he was trying to explain things, but it didn't make it any easier. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought Grandma would feel better having a quiet day with me instead of sitting at the dinner while everyone's talking over her. It didn't seem like anyone else was stepping up to make sure she wasn't alone. Ben sighed heavily, and I could hear his frustration. "I get that, really, but the way you went about it, it just threw everything off. It's like you put Grandma in the middle of something that wasn't her issue to begin with. You know how much planning went into that dinner? The fact that we weren't all together just feels off." I felt a pang of guilt, but I wasn't ready to just accept it all yet. "So, what? You think I should have just ignored Grandma and gone along with everything, even if she felt isolated?" Ben didn't answer right away, and the silence hung heavy between us. I think you could have handled it differently," he said finally. "I'm not trying to say what you did was terrible, but it's just that we all had this tradition, and it didn't feel like you cared about that. It stung, more than I expected. I thought I was doing something good for Grandma, but now it seemed like the rest of the family just wanted to protect their traditions, regardless of how it made people feel." "Look, I don't want to fight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But Grandma's not going to be around forever, and I want her to know she's not forgotten. I'm not sorry I spent the day with her, Ben. I just wish you could all understand why it mattered." There was another pause, but this time it felt less like tension and more like a small moment of understanding. "I get it. I really do. I just think we all need to talk about it and figure out how to move forward. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure it doesn't get in the way of our relationship." It wasn't much of an apology, but it felt like a tiny crack in the wall that had been built up around me. But the drama didn't end there. Later that week, my mom finally called, and when I saw her name pop up on my phone, I felt my stomach twist. I had no idea what to expect, but it was time for us to have the conversation that had been long overdue. "Mom," I said before she could even say anything, "I know you're still upset. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." She was quiet for a moment, and then her voice softened just a little. "I'm not upset, sweetie. I'm disappointed. You know how important family is to me. Thanksgiving isn't just about the food. It's about being together, making memories, and showing up for one another." I wanted to explain myself, but something in her tone made me pause. "I understand that, Mom. I just didn't want Grandma to feel like she didn't matter. I guess I got caught up in making her feel special, and I didn't realize how much that would hurt everyone else." She sighed, and I could hear the weight of it. "I know you're trying to be a good granddaughter, and I appreciate that, but we all need to be on the same page. It's not just about Grandma, it's about the family dynamic. I don't want this to come between us. But I also don't want you to make decisions that affect everyone without thinking it through first." "I get it," I said quietly. "I really do. And I'll try to be more considerate next time." There was another long pause before she spoke again, but this time her tone was softer. "I'm glad you understand, but you also need to know that traditions matter to us. Maybe next time we can find a way to include Grandma in a way that doesn't divide the family." I nodded, even though I knew she couldn't see me. "I'll make sure of it. I just don't want to be the one who makes anyone feel left out again." The conversation ended on a somewhat better note, but I still felt the weight of everything lingering in the back of my mind. I'd wanted to make Grandma feel special, but now I was left questioning whether it was worth the fallout with the rest of my family. Was it worth it? In the weeks after Thanksgiving, things slowly started to return to normal, but there was still an unspoken tension hanging in the air. I knew that my family still wasn't thrilled about how things played out, and honestly, neither was I. I had done what I thought was right, but I didn't want to spend every holiday feeling like an outcast because of IT.so. I decided to be the one to extend the olive branch. A few days before Christmas, I called my mom. "Hey, I've been thinking," I started. "I don't want what happened at Thanksgiving to ruin how we celebrate the holidays. I get why you were upset, and I know I should have handled things differently." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice when she finally responded. "I appreciate that. I just wish we had talked it out before everything got so messy." "I know," I admitted, "but I don't regret making sure Grandma wasn't alone. I just wish I had found a way to do it without making it feel like I was choosing sides." That seemed to break down some of the remaining tension because my mom let out a small sigh. "I know you love her. We all do. I think we just let the stress of the holiday get in the way of what really mattered." That was the first real moment of understanding we'd had since everything happened, and it felt like progress, so I took it a step further. For Christmas, I was thinking, why don't we have it at Grandma's place? She doesn't have to travel. She'll be in the comfort of her own home, and we can still all be together. That way, no one feels left out. To my surprise, my mom actually considered it. "That might actually work," she said. "Let me talk to everyone and see what they think." A few days later, she called me back and told me that the family was on board. For the first time in years, we would be celebrating a holiday at Grandma's house instead of making her fit into our plans. Christmas came, and for the first time in a long time, the whole family felt connected. Grandma was glowing with happiness, telling stories at the dinner table, and even the family members who had been the most upset at me were laughing and enjoying the time together. And that's when I realized, maybe all of this had needed to happen. Maybe the Thanksgiving fallout wasn't just about me or about Grandma being alone. Maybe it was a wake-up call for all of us. Because in the end, it wasn't about traditions or who was right or wrong. It was about making sure that the people we love feel seen, heard, and included. And that's exactly what we did.
So, after everything that happened, was OP really the a-hole for refusing to leave Grandma behind? Or was the family in the wrong for prioritizing convenience over their own mother? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more.
I'm Isaac, 27, and I've always been the odd one out in my family. Not because I was rebellious or caused trouble, but because I didn't fit their mold. My parents, especially my dad, built their lives around appearances. Every family photo, every holiday, every word that left their mouths seemed rehearsed, meant for an audience. My older sister, Lydia, fit right in. She was the golden example, polished, confident, and perfectly attuned to the tone my parents expected. I was quieter, more reserved, and, as my mom once phrased it, not quite the family type. I used to think she meant I wasn't social enough. Later, I realized she meant I didn't play the part. My dad's 60th birthday dinner was supposed to be a family affair, as my mom put it, something meaningful and intimate. She made a big deal out of inviting everyone weeks in advance. Lydia and her fiancé, a few of Dad's business friends, even my cousin Joel, who barely showed up to anything unless there was free food or networking involved. I wasn't going to go at first. After the last few years, I'd grown used to keeping my distance. But when Dad called personally and said, "It would mean a lot to me if you came," I agreed. I told myself maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The restaurant they chose was one of those upscale places where the lighting is dim and the menus don't list prices. I arrived early, which turned out to be my first mistake. My family was already there, all smiles and laughter, glasses clinking. Lydia spotted me and waved me over, but it was the kind of wave you give someone you barely know. She leaned across the table, her perfume sharp and floral, and said, "You made it." I told Dad you might flake. I smiled anyway and sat down at the only empty chair, on the far end, slightly separated from the rest. Dad looked good for 60, broad-shouldered, confident, the kind of man who filled a room even when he wasn't talking. When he saw me, his expression softened. "There's my boy," he said. "Did you find the place all right?" I nodded, trying to ignore Lydia's smirk. Dinner started out fine. The conversation swirled around business, Lydia's new promotion, Dad's plans for retirement. Every time I tried to add something, mentioning my small graphic design studio or the fact that I'd recently landed a client overseas, it got brushed off. Lydia would glance at her fiancé and say something like, "That's cute, Isaac's doing his little projects again," before changing the subject. My parents didn't correct her. They never did. I'd grown used to it, but that night it stung more than usual. Maybe it was because I'd actually been doing well lately, finally making enough to stand on my own. Maybe it was because Dad had sounded so genuine on the phone when he said he wanted me there. Whatever it was, I tried not to show it. I just smiled and sipped my water while they ordered bottles of wine and laughed about people I didn't know. Halfway through the meal, Lydia started a story about her engagement party, the one I hadn't been invited to. She was describing the decorations and the champagne tower when she stopped mid-sentence, turned to me, and said, "Oh, that's right. You didn't come, did you? Or were you not invited?" Her tone was teasing, but the look in her eyes was sharp, deliberate. Mom chuckled softly, the way she always did when Lydia said something cutting. "Don't start, Lydia," she said, but she was smiling. Dad shook his head, more amused than annoyed. "Let's not pick on Isaac," he said, though he didn't really sound serious. "He's here now, that's what matters." The rest of the table laughed lightly, like it was all harmless fun. I forced a smile and said nothing. When the waiter came around to take dessert orders, Lydia leaned over and said, "You're quiet tonight, little brother." Not feeling talkative. I shrugged. "Just listening." She tilted her head, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. "You've always been more of an observer, haven't you? Not really one of us." That line hung in the air. I heard it echo louder than the chatter around us. "Not really one of us." She said it casually, almost sweetly, but everyone at the table went quiet for a beat too long. Then Dad laughed to break the tension. "Come on now, Lydia. Don't be rude." I waited for someone to disagree with her, for Mom to step in and say something kind. But no one did. They just laughed it off and went back to their wine. I smiled faintly and excused myself to the restroom, more to breathe than anything else. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, I wondered why I'd come. I looked tired. My tie felt too tight, my suit a little out of place in this room full of people who'd long decided where I stood. I told myself I'd make it through dessert, say happy birthday, and leave quietly. When I got back, the waiter was carrying out a large cake, 3 layers, frosted and decorated with gold details. Everyone clapped as Dad stood for a toast. Glasses were raised, and Lydia began speaking first, naturally. "To the best father anyone could ask for," she said, looking radiant under the soft lighting. "For everything you've done for us, me, Mom, even Isaac." A few laughs. "You've taught us what family means." Then Joel spoke, then Dad's business partner, then Mom. One by one, they stood, glasses lifted, words flowing easily. No one looked my way. I waited for a pause, for someone to say, "Isaac, do you want to say something?" But the pause never came. When the laughter died down, Lydia leaned toward me again. "You're not going to say anything?" she asked quietly. "Or maybe you just don't have anything to toast about?" I stared at my glass for a moment. "Guess not," I said. The table erupted in chatter again, moving on like nothing had happened. I sat there, pretending to be absorbed in the flame of the candle in front of me, when the waiter suddenly tapped my shoulder. He looked hesitant, polite. "Excuse me, sir," he said softly. "Your family asked if you could handle your part of the bill separately. Should I bring it to you now?" I blinked. "What?" "They mentioned you'd be paying for yourself tonight." For a second, I couldn't even respond. The noise around me dulled. I glanced toward my family. They were still laughing, glasses raised, oblivious. Lydia was showing her engagement ring to Dad's friend, her hand glittering in the light. I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said to the waiter. "Go ahead. Bring me my check." When he left, I looked at them one more time. They didn't even notice. Something in me shifted then, not anger exactly, but a deep, final clarity. I paid my bill, folded the receipt neatly, and stood. The chair scraped lightly against the floor, catching Lydia's attention for the first time in what felt like hours. She frowned. "You're leaving?" I smiled. "Yeah, I think I've stayed long enough." Dad turned, startled. "Wait, don't go," he called as I started walking toward the door. But I didn't look back. And as I stepped outside into the cool night air, one thought settled in my mind, steady and sharp. This was the last time I'd ever be the outsider in my own family's story. Because next time, when they called my name, it wouldn't be for a dinner. It would be for something they never saw coming. The days after that dinner felt strangely quiet. I went home expecting to feel angry, but what I really felt was hollow, like something had finally burned itself out inside me. I didn't text my dad back when he sent a half-hearted, "Sorry about the confusion with the bill, son." Confusion. That's what he called it. Lydia hadn't said a word, of course. Neither had Mom. The silence told me everything. I wasn't part of their world anymore, at least not in any way that mattered to them. Still, I kept going. I buried myself in work, focusing on the design studio I'd built from scratch. It wasn't much when I started, but by then, I had a small team, a few loyal clients, and a reputation that was finally taking off. I'd poured everything into it, late nights, weekends, even skipped meals. That business wasn't just a company. It was proof I could stand on my own. A few months passed. I didn't see much of my family, except through Lydia's endless stream of social media posts, photos of brunches, spa weekends with Mom, and smiling group shots where my absence was never mentioned. Sometimes Dad would call, usually when he needed help with something techie or just a quick favor for his company. I helped when I could, but each time I hung up, I felt like I'd given a little more of myself to people who didn't value it. Then one morning, out of nowhere, Lydia called. "Isaac, I need your help with something." Her voice was overly bright, the way it always got when she wanted something. "Morning to you too," I said flatly. "Sorry, yeah, morning. So, Dad's planning a retirement event next month, and I'm in charge of the presentation. You know, photos, videos, some kind of slideshow thing. I figured since you're creative, maybe you could put it together?" I almost laughed. The last time I'd been at one of Dad's family events, I'd been humiliated in front of everyone. But now that she needed something, suddenly I was creative. "I'm kind of busy," I said. "Oh, come on," she insisted. "It's not a big deal. Just a few clips, some music. You'd be helping Dad, not me." Helping Dad. That phrase did it. Despite everything, I still wanted to believe he cared. So I sighed and said, "Fine. Send me what you have." Over the next few days, I worked on it between client projects. Lydia sent me a folder full of old family photos and grainy video clips, vacations, birthdays, business milestones. I noticed there weren't many with me in them. In fact, in the few that included me, I was often standing in the background, barely visible. I mentioned it jokingly in a text. "Not a lot of me in these, huh?" She replied with a laughing emoji and said, "Guess you were camera shy." I finished the project anyway. When I sent the final version to Lydia, she replied, "Looks great. Dad's going to love it." For a moment, I let myself feel proud. Maybe, I thought, this could be a small step toward making things better. A week later, I got a call from one of my clients, a corporate firm I'd recently signed with for a major branding project. The tone in their voice was tense. "Isaac, we need to talk about something," the manager said. "We saw some of your work featured at a recent event, and it looks like it was credited to someone else. Are you working with another agency now?" My stomach dropped. "What event?" "The Thompson and Company Retirement Gala. The presentation you made. It had your design style all over it. But the credits listed visual direction, Lydia Myers." I froze. Lydia had used my work, every image, every transition, every second of that slideshow, and put her name on it. After the call ended, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the computer screen. I opened the email I'd sent her, the one with the file attached, and saw that she'd forwarded it to her work address. I felt sick. I called her immediately. She picked up on the second ring, sounding cheerful. "Hey, what's up? What's up?" My voice was shaking. "You took my work. You put your name on it." There was a pause, then a dismissive laugh. "Oh, that. Isaac, it's not that deep. It was a family project. I just presented it on behalf of everyone." "On behalf of everyone," I repeated slowly. "It was my design, Lydia. You didn't even touch it." "Relax," she said. "You're overreacting. It's not like you were going to use it for anything. And it looked better with my name on it. Dad's friends know me, not you." That last part hit like a punch. "You stole my work to make yourself look good in front of Dad's business friends." "Don't be dramatic," she said sharply. "You always make everything about you. I asked you to help, and you did. That's what family does." I hung up before I said something I'd regret. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head. The casual way she brushed it off, like my time and effort meant nothing. It wasn't even about the credit anymore. It was about respect. Every time I tried to stand on my own, Lydia found a way to knock me back down. And Dad? He let her. He always did. The next morning, Dad called. I almost didn't answer. Isaac, he said warmly. The presentation was fantastic. Lydia really outdid herself, huh? I closed my eyes. She didn't do it, I said quietly. I did. There was a short silence, then a sigh. Come on, son. Don't start. Lydia told me you helped a little, but she put it all together. Don't make this about credit. It's not about credit, I said. It's about honesty. Dad's tone hardened. She did a great job, and everyone was impressed. You should be proud of your sister instead of picking a fight. Proud, I said bitterly. For stealing my work? He hesitated for a moment, then said, You always find a reason to feel left out, Isaac. Maybe it's time you stop seeing yourself as the victim. That line broke something in me. I didn't respond. I just ended the call. For a while, I stayed quiet. I ignored Lydia's texts, Dad's calls, Mom's attempts at clearing the air. I threw myself into work again, but it was harder this time. Every time I looked at my computer screen, I thought about that stolen project, the laughter at the dinner, the way they all looked right through me. Then, about a month later, something happened that made everything worse. I was at a client meeting downtown when I got a call from a friend who worked at a marketing firm, someone I'd collaborated with before. Hey, Isaac, she said cautiously. I'm calling because I got a pitch from someone claiming to be your partner in a new design venture. I just wanted to check if that's legit. My heart sank. Who was it? Lydia Myers. She said you two were expanding your business together and that she's handling client outreach now. She even used your portfolio in her pitch. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's not true. She has nothing to do with my business. I figured, my friend said. I just thought you should know before this spreads. She's been emailing people, using your logo and everything. When the call ended, my hands were trembling. I went straight to my office and opened my inbox. Sure enough, there were messages from clients asking if I'd approved Lydia's new partnership announcement. She had used my branding, my designs, even my company's name. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was deliberate. I called her again. She didn't pick up. I tried texting, emailing, nothing. Then I got a message from Dad. Lydia told me you're upset about the new business arrangement, it read. You should be grateful she's helping you reach new clients. This could be good for you. Grateful. The word made my stomach turn. That evening, I drove to my parents' house without calling first. When Mom opened the door, her face lit up for a second before freezing when she saw my expression. Isaac, what's wrong? Where's Lydia? I asked. They were all in the living room. Mom, Dad, Lydia, and her fiancé. They looked up in surprise when I walked in. Lydia's expression shifted instantly from startled to smug. Well, this is unexpected, she said. Didn't think you'd actually show up. What are you doing? I asked, my voice low. You used my company name. You're contacting my clients. She rolled her eyes. Oh, that. I told you, it's collaboration. You act like I stole your house or something. You're impersonating me, I said sharply. That's not collaboration. Dad stood, frowning. Enough, Isaac. Lower your voice. No, I said. I've been quiet long enough. I looked at Lydia. You're using my work, my name, and my reputation to get clients you couldn't earn yourself. Her fiancé laughed under his breath. Sounds like a business misunderstanding. It's theft, I said coldly. Dad crossed his arms. Watch your tone. She's trying to help you grow. I turned to him, stunned. Help me? She's sabotaging me. Lydia smiled sweetly. You always see things in the worst way, Isaac. I thought we could finally do something together as a family, but if you don't want that, fine. I'll keep the clients myself. That was the moment it clicked. They were never going to see me as their equal. No matter what I built, no matter how hard I worked, I'd always be the outsider, the one they could use when it suited them and discard when it didn't. I left without another word. As I stepped outside, the night air felt heavier than usual. My hands were still shaking, but my thoughts were clear. For the first few weeks after that night, everything in my life felt like it was unraveling. Word of Lydia's collaboration spread faster than I expected. A few of my regular clients hesitated to continue with me, confused about whether she was part of my company or not. One even said, "We just assumed she was your business manager." She sounded so professional. Professional. That word almost made me laugh. Lydia could charm anyone if she wanted to, especially people who didn't know what she was really like behind closed doors. The damage didn't stop there. She'd set up a fake website, my company name, my logo, even parts of my portfolio copied straight from my site. She'd replaced my bio with one that called her the creative director and founder. I sent her a message demanding she take it down. She didn't respond. When I called, she blocked me. I went to my parents again, hoping for support. I don't know why I expected anything different. Dad's voice was firm, almost rehearsed. Lydia told us you're overreacting again. She said she's just trying to expand what you started. She's impersonating me, I said. She's stealing clients, using my name. Mom cut in softly. Isaac, can't you two just work together for once? She's always been better at business, and you're the creative one. Maybe if you just... I interrupted, my patience gone. If I just let her take credit for everything, right? That's what you mean. Dad's jaw tightened. You've always been difficult, Isaac. Always so sensitive. She's trying to include you. I realized then that they weren't going to help. They never had. In their eyes, Lydia could do no wrong. She was their success story, the daughter who made them proud at dinner parties, the one who knew how to perform in public. And me? I was the one they tolerated, the quiet one they could use as a contrast to make her shine brighter. That night, I went home feeling like I'd lost everything. My business, my sense of belonging, my name, even. I sat in my small apartment, surrounded by sketches and half-finished designs, wondering if it was even worth continuing. But then something shifted. One of my clients, an older woman named Mrs. Patel, who owned a small local bakery, called me out of the blue. She'd been one of my first customers, back when my company was nothing but a desk in my bedroom. I heard about what's been happening, she said gently. Your sister contacted me too. I told her no. I only work with you, Isaac. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until my throat tightened. Thank you, I said quietly. She chuckled softly. You have talent, Beta. No one can take that from you. Start again if you have to. Sometimes losing something clears the path. Her words stuck with me. The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to let Lydia, or anyone, erase what I'd built. I took the website offline, started a new domain, rebranded everything under a fresh name. New logo, new style, new tone. It felt strange at first, like I was erasing part of myself. But as I worked, I realized I wasn't losing my identity. I was reclaiming it. I registered the new business name, filed for updated ownership documents, and even hired a lawyer to help me pursue Lydia for brand infringement. He warned me it might be complicated since she was family, but I told him I didn't care. Weeks turned into months. My business took a hit, but slowly, word began to spread again, this time the right way. I posted my projects on design forums, collaborated with small creators online, and built connections beyond my local circle. I focused less on impressing people and more on doing the kind of work that actually fulfilled me. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I questioned whether I was just fooling myself, whether Lydia had been right all along, that I'd never measure up. But then I'd get an email from a satisfied client or see one of my designs featured in a small business magazine, and that doubt would quiet down. What surprised me most was how freeing it felt to build something on my own terms. Without my family's expectations hovering over me, I finally had space to breathe. Still, Lydia's shadow wasn't gone. Every once in a while, I'd hear her name through mutual contacts. She'd landed a position as a marketing consultant, using connections Dad had given her. I also learned that she was still using elements of my old brand in her presentations, subtly implying that she'd been the creative force behind it. It hurt, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I kept working quietly, letting success grow slowly, like roots under the surface. By the time a full year had passed since that disastrous dinner, my new company was stable again. I had a small office space downtown, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I hired 2 interns and 1 part-time assistant, the kind of team I used to dream about. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from a representative at a major design conference. Isaac Lane, we've been following your recent work, and we'd love to feature you as one of our guest speakers this year. Your rebranding campaign for small businesses really stood out to us. For a moment, I was speechless. You mean as a speaker? Yes, she said. Your story would inspire a lot of new designers, especially how you rebuilt your company after, well, everything that happened. I didn't ask how she knew about everything. News had a way of traveling. but I said yes. When the day of the conference arrived, I stood backstage, watching other presenters take the stage. My hands were shaking slightly, not from nerves, but from the realization of how far I'd come. A year ago, I'd walked out of that restaurant humiliated and invisible. Now, I was about to speak to a room full of people who wanted to hear my story. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand, to ask questions, to thank me. It was surreal. One woman said, "Your story reminded me of why I started creating in the first place." That night, I went home exhausted but lighter than I'd felt in a long time. The next morning, I woke up to something unexpected, an email from my father. It was short. "Isaac, congratulations on your talk. Lydia mentioned you've been doing well. We're proud of you. Maybe we can all get together soon, just like old times." Just like old times. The irony made me laugh out loud. I didn't respond. But apparently, that get-together wasn't a request, it was already in motion. A few days later, Mom called, cheerful and insistent. "Your father's planning a family dinner to celebrate. He says it's time to move forward. Everyone will be there. Lydia too." I wanted to say no. Every part of me screamed not to go. But a smaller part, the one that still wanted closure, said yes. When I arrived, the same familiar faces were there. Dad, Mom, Lydia, her fiancé, and a few family friends. The restaurant was fancy again, of course. The atmosphere felt eerily similar to that birthday dinner a year ago. Same kind of laughter, same smug expressions. But something was different this time. When I walked in, the hostess smiled and said, "Ah, Mr. Lane, your table is ready. The others are already seated." The way she said Mr. Lane, with recognition, made Lydia's expression flicker as I approached. Dad stood up and clapped me on the shoulder. "Isaac, there he is. We were just talking about your business. Lydia says you've been making waves lately." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's great to see you doing well," she said smoothly. "I always knew you'd figure things out eventually." I smiled back, calm, composed. "Yeah, it took a while, but I did." Throughout dinner, they asked polite questions about my company, though Lydia kept steering the conversation back to herself, her new job, her upcoming wedding, her big projects. I let her talk. Let them all talk. Because for once, I didn't need their approval. I wasn't sitting there hoping to belong. Still, something about Lydia's tone nagged at me. She kept hinting at a new partnership, something major that would change everything. She didn't name the client, but when she mentioned the industry, my stomach turned. It sounded too familiar. I didn't say anything then. I just listened carefully, every piece clicking together in my mind. When dessert came, she leaned over, just like she had that night a year ago, and whispered, "You've done well, Isaac. But I hope you don't forget who inspired you to start." I looked her straight in the eye and smiled faintly. "Don't worry," I said. "I remember everything." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I already had proof of what she'd been doing again. This time, I'd been prepared. And soon, they were all going to see that I wasn't the quiet, naive one anymore. Months turned into years, and the silence between me and my family stretched like an ocean I had no desire to cross. I had learned to live with it, to breathe without their voices filling the air, to move without waiting for their approval. For the first time in my life, my worth didn't depend on being noticed by them. I had built something real, something that was mine alone. After leaving home, I'd started small, renting a cramped apartment with peeling paint and a single window that barely opened. But that room became my sanctuary. I worked long hours, saved every coin, and poured every ounce of frustration into my small business. The one they mocked, dismissed, and called a phase. The one they said I'd abandon once I realized how the real world works. The irony was almost poetic, because now, I was the real world they never believed in. My designs had caught attention online. Orders began to flood in, slowly at first, then in waves that kept me awake through the night. I remember the day I received my first large partnership offer, a collaboration that would pay more than my father's monthly salary had ever been. I didn't celebrate publicly. I didn't post about it. I just sat at my small desk, staring at the numbers on the screen, knowing exactly what this meant. They would regret ever doubting me. Still, I didn't reach out. I waited. I watched. And that patience became my greatest weapon. By the second year, I'd expanded. My name was starting to circulate in circles they'd once deemed too good for me. I hired a small team, people who believed in what I created, who didn't treat me like I was fragile or delusional. Every contract signed, every milestone reached, was a quiet rebellion against the years of humiliation they'd put me through. Then one morning, an email appeared in my inbox, an invitation to a prestigious local awards event, one that celebrated rising entrepreneurs and innovators in the region. I'd been nominated. My heart raced as I read the message again and again. It wasn't just recognition. It was validation, public and undeniable. And that's when I knew. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. But revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about shouting. It was about precision. It was about timing. I didn't want to confront them out of anger. Anger was messy, fleeting, and easy to dismiss. No, I wanted clarity. I wanted them to look me in the eye and see exactly what they threw away. I began preparing quietly. Every detail mattered. Every move had to be deliberate. I reached out to the event organizers to confirm my attendance. Then I asked, with a polite tone and a smile they couldn't see, if I could bring a few guests. They said yes. The guest list was open, and that was the final piece I needed. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the glow from my computer casting light across the documents spread out before me. Old family photos, scans of text messages where they dismissed me, belittled me, and accused me of being too dramatic. Screenshots of my brother's posts, flaunting the expensive lifestyle my parents had funded by draining my savings years ago. I still remembered how it felt to open my bank account and realize it was nearly empty, how my mother justified it by saying, "It's for your brother's future, you'll understand one day." I never did, and I never would. Now, their future was unraveling. The last I'd heard, my brother's business, the one they stole my money to support, was barely holding together. Rumors spread about unpaid debts and clients pulling out. The company's name was quietly losing its glow. And the best part? They didn't know that one of the firms they were trying to impress had already partnered with me. That was the beauty of moving in silence. By the time they realized, it would already be too late. A few weeks before the event, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. "Mom, hi sweetheart. It's been so long. I heard you're doing well. Maybe we could meet?" I stared at the message for a long time, my hands still. I hadn't heard her call me sweetheart in years. The word felt hollow now, like a cheap attempt to rewrite history. She must have seen something online. Maybe a post, maybe a rumor. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she reached out, and that told me everything. They needed me again. I didn't reply immediately. I let days pass. Then, finally, I answered simply, "Me. I've been busy. But maybe soon." She replied within seconds. "Mom, that's wonderful. We miss you. Everyone does. We'd love to see you. Maybe we can all come to your award ceremony? We heard you're nominated." My lips curled into a slow, quiet smile. So that was it. They wanted to come now that there'd be cameras, photographers, and applause. They wanted to stand beside me, to pretend they'd always been supportive. The same people who told me I was wasting my life now wanted to bask in the glow of what I'd built. I could have said no. But where's the satisfaction in that? So I said yes. The following weeks were filled with rehearsed calm. I acted polite when my mother called, distant but cordial. I let her believe I'd softened. That time had healed the wound she inflicted. Meanwhile, I coordinated every detail behind the scenes, not out of cruelty, but clarity. I wanted them to see the contrast between who I used to be and who I had become, between the child they controlled and the adult they could no longer touch. When the day of the ceremony finally arrived, I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized myself. Confidence had reshaped me. It was in my posture, my eyes, even the way I adjusted my suit. I wasn't that quiet, hesitant person anymore. I was the culmination of every insult they'd thrown at me. I was proof that I never needed their approval to succeed. Outside the event hall, luxury cars lined the street, and a red carpet stretched toward the grand entrance. I arrived early, not to make an impression, but to take it all in. The crowd, the laughter, the distant flashes of cameras, it was all surreal. Yet I felt calm, centered. I greeted the hosts, posed for a few photos, and took my seat near the front. Then I saw them. My family entered together, my parents leading, my brother trailing behind. Their faces a mixture of awe and nervous pride. They looked so out of place among the polished crowd. My mother's eyes scanned the room until they landed on me, and she waved enthusiastically, as if we'd never fought, never shouted, never cut each other out. I nodded politely, my expression unreadable. The game had begun. The ceremony moved slowly, each speech and award a buildup of tension I didn't need to force. I could feel their eyes on me constantly, waiting for the moment my name would be called. My mother whispered something to my father, who smiled, already rehearsing the pride he'd perform when cameras turned our way. But they didn't know what was waiting. Because when my category finally came, when the announcer called my name and applause filled the hall, I stood and walked to the stage knowing exactly what this moment meant. I accepted the award with grace, thanked my team, and smiled at the cameras. My voice didn't tremble. My hands didn't shake. When I looked out at the audience, I saw my family watching, smiling wide, believing they were part of my triumph. But I knew what came next would erase that illusion forever. When I stepped down from that stage, the applause still echoing through the hall, I didn't look at my family right away. I wanted them to sit with the image of me standing under those lights, confident, composed, unshaken. The contrast between that moment and every time they'd called me a failure was more than enough to sting. But this wasn't about temporary sting. This was about truth, raw, undeniable truth. As the ceremony moved into the dinner portion, servers glided between tables, placing plates of roasted vegetables, glazed salmon, and sparkling glasses of water. My family sat 2 tables away, their chatter loud enough to hear. My mother's laugh was forced, almost desperate. My father's voice carried that familiar edge of control. He really turned things around, didn't he? Someone nearby whispered. Isaac, the one who owns that new design firm. His story's all over the papers this week. I caught my father's glance. He heard it too. His jaw tightened before he forced a smile at the guests around him. My mother leaned closer to him, whispering something, probably reminding him to look proud for the cameras. I stayed quiet. I wanted to see how long they'd pretend. Halfway through the dinner, one of the event coordinators approached me. Mr. Hale, she said softly. Just confirming. You requested the short presentation before the closing remarks? I smiled. Yes, thank you. Her words made my father's head snap up. He looked confused, his brows furrowing. Presentation? He mouthed. I gave him a polite nod. When the lights dimmed slightly, the coordinator returned to the stage and said, Before we close, tonight's winner, Mr. Isaac Hale, has prepared something special to share. I walked up again, calm, collected, with that same stillness that once came from silence, not confidence. But this time, I owned the silence. It belonged to me. The projector behind me flickered to life, displaying a simple slide, a journey to independence. I wasn't planning to speak again. I began, my voice carrying easily through the quiet room. But tonight isn't just about an award. It's about the path that led here, the people who taught me what strength really means. And sometimes, I added slowly, my eyes flicking toward my parents' table, those lessons come from pain. I saw my mother's smile falter. My brother shifted in his chair. I continued, pacing slowly. A few years ago, I was told I wasn't good enough, that my ideas were childish, that I was an embarrassment. My savings, everything I worked for, was taken from me to fund someone else's dream. I was told to stay quiet about it, that it was for the family. Murmurs rippled through the audience. My father's knuckles turned white around his fork. I clicked to the next slide, a photo of my early sketches, drawn at that cramped desk in my old apartment. Then another, my first workshop, tiny but full of heart. Then another, a contract signed with one of the city's largest companies. This, I said, gesturing to the images, is what happens when you stop trying to earn love that was never meant for you. When you build for yourself, not for the approval of those who only show up once success is certain. I turned back to them briefly. Because family isn't just who you're born to. It's who stands beside you when no one else will. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. My mother looked pale. My father sat rigid, eyes darting toward the crowd that was now turning toward them, whispers swelling like a tide. My brother's jaw twitched. He couldn't even look at me. After the event, guests began approaching me, shaking my hand, congratulating me, asking questions about my company. Cameras flashed. People asked for interviews. My parents stayed seated at their table, invisible now. No one congratulated them. No one asked for a family photo. It was perfect. When the crowd thinned and the music softened, I approached their table. The air was heavy. My mother spoke first, her voice brittle. That speech, that wasn't necessary, Isaac. I met her gaze. It was honest. You humiliated us, she hissed quietly, her hand trembling around her clutch. No, I said evenly. I told the truth. If that humiliated you, then maybe you finally understand how I felt. My father stood abruptly, his tone sharp. You think this makes you better than us? You're still part of this family whether you like it or not. I looked at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until even he seemed unsure. No, I said softly. I was. You made sure I wouldn't be again. And with that, I turned to leave. But before I could take another step, a familiar voice, the event's senior organizer, stopped me. Mr. Hale, she said, smiling warmly. We're finalizing the dinner bills. Would you like your family's charges added to yours as before? The timing was perfect, unplanned, yet poetic. I glanced at my father, whose expression shifted instantly from anger to awkwardness. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. I smiled faintly at the organizer. No, I said. I think they can handle their own this time. Her eyes widened slightly, realizing the weight of the moment, and she nodded politely before walking away. The silence that followed was cutting. My father's hand tightened at his side, but he said nothing. My mother looked down, her face flushed. My brother's shoulders slumped. I didn't need to raise my voice or deliver a final line. Everything had already been said. Outside, the night air was cool, clean, the kind that carries the faint scent of rain on stone. I walked slowly toward the car waiting by the curb, the city lights reflecting off the glass buildings like quiet applause. My assistant held the door open, smiling. Congratulations again, sir. That speech was incredible. Thank you, I said, sliding in. But before the car door closed, I looked back one last time through the glass entrance of the hall. My family stood together, but not the way they used to. My father arguing quietly with the staff. My mother clutching her purse, trying to hide her embarrassment. My brother standing apart, looking lost. For the first time, I didn't feel angry, just free. Because the truth was, revenge had never really been about destruction. It was about release. It was about balance, about letting the truth speak louder than the lies they'd built around me. They would have to live with what they saw tonight. They would have to live with knowing that I had become everything they said I couldn't be, and I did it without them. I leaned back in the seat, watching the hall fade behind me as the car pulled away. The city stretched ahead, wide, open, and mine. And somewhere deep inside, the silence that had once hurt me now felt like peace. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't dream of being seen or heard. I just dreamed of what came next, a life finally lived on my own terms. Because walking away wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs, the one where they'd finally have to sit with what they'd done and realize. They had lost me forever. My family always overlooked me. Then at my brother's wedding, his fiancée leaned over and said, "You're the investor?" I sat at the back, watching quietly. Then she whispered, "Wait, you're the one funding the whole event." Everyone went silent. Even my father was stunned. I'm Lisa, 38, and I've been the quiet shadow in my family for as long as I can remember. Not the oldest, not the youngest, just the middle child who always seemed to blend into the background, especially next to my older brother, Mark. Mark was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. From the moment he took his first steps, everything was about Mark. His achievements, his choices, his friends, they were celebrated like he was some kind of royalty. Me? I was just Lisa, the sister who was expected to be polite, helpful, and invisible. Growing up, it was a daily battle just to get a scrap of recognition. When I brought home decent grades, my mom barely glanced up from her phone. When I got into a good college, it was nice, but Mark's scholarship was bigger. Even my dad, who was usually quiet, made sure to remind me how Mark was destined for greatness. It wasn't subtle, it was constant and crushing. Mark got a great job after college. He moved back home for a while, and our parents acted like he was a hero returning from war. Meanwhile, I was working 3 part-time jobs just to pay off student loans and keep my own small business afloat, trying to build something of my own, something that didn't rely on being the golden child. But in their eyes, success was loud and flashy, like Mark's. Mine was quiet and slow, and therefore invisible. When Mark announced he was getting married, the whole family exploded with excitement. Invitations, parties, planning, everything revolved around his big day. My parents practically insisted I be involved, though it was clear they wanted me there as part of the background, not as someone who mattered. They even asked me to help with some of the preparations, mostly menial stuff that no one else wanted to do. I helped, of course. I didn't want to rock the boat. I was tired of being the family afterthought, but I wasn't about to start any drama. Still, I kept my head down, contributed quietly, and watched from the sidelines as Mark and his fiancée, Sarah, soaked up all the attention. Sarah was another story. She wasn't just the bride, she was clearly someone used to having things go her way. Polished, sharp-tongued, and smart, she ran the wedding planning like a general leading troops. She was polite enough to me but kept her distance. I noticed the way she rolled her eyes at me during conversations and how she spoke in clipped tones to my parents, as if to show she was in control. I understood. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to share the spotlight with anyone, especially not the invisible sister. The day of the wedding arrived. The venue was a beautiful, sprawling estate, something that could easily double as a boutique hotel or museum. The flowers were extravagant, the catering flawless, and the guest list was packed with people clearly chosen to impress. The kind of event that screams money was no object. What struck me was that while Mark and Sarah basked in attention, I was seated at the very back, away from the head table. It was as if they wanted me to be there physically, but not really part of the celebration. I didn't complain. I was used to being sidelined. Then came the moment that changed everything. During the reception, as the music played softly in the background and the guests mingled, Sarah suddenly slipped into the seat beside me. I wasn't sure what she wanted, maybe to make sure I wasn't causing trouble, but what she said next caught me off guard. "You're the investor, right?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. I froze. I didn't know what she meant. "The one funding the whole event," she whispered, leaning closer. I just stared at her, waiting. She nodded slowly, eyes wide with realization. No wonder everything looks this perfect. The room seemed to grow quieter as a few heads turned toward us. I glanced around and noticed the sudden shift in energy. Even my father, who was normally too busy smirking at Mark's success to notice me, was looking in our direction, stunned. His usual smug expression was gone, replaced by something close to disbelief. I didn't say a word. I just sat back, letting the silence do the work for me. After Sarah's whisper, a ripple of shock passed through the guests nearby. The words hung heavy in the air, like a secret dropped too loudly in a quiet room. I could feel dozens of eyes flicking toward me, not with admiration or curiosity, but with disbelief and something darker, like suspicion mixed with jealousy. My father was the first to break the silence. He straightened in his chair and glanced at me, his face a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't immediately read. Pride? Surprise? Or maybe something closer to resentment? My mother, sitting beside him, looked equally stunned, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously on her champagne glass, which she promptly set down. She hadn't said a word since Sarah's comment, but her eyes darted between Mark, who was blissfully unaware of the tension, and me, the forgotten daughter. Mark's friends nearby exchanged glances, whispering quietly, casting curious looks my way. I could see the gears turning in their heads. Who is this Lisa? How is she paying for this? Why haven't we heard about her? No one asked me directly, but I didn't need them to. The silence spoke volumes. I realized then that everything I'd done, every hour I'd poured into my business, had gone unnoticed by my family until now. The truth was, I hadn't been silent by accident. I'd spent years building a modest investment portfolio, quietly funding a small but growing business in tech. It wasn't flashy or talked about at family dinners. It was mine. I wasn't interested in bragging. I was focused on being independent. I wanted to prove to myself, not to them, that I could succeed on my own terms. When Mark decided to get married, I saw an opportunity to step up and quietly support the event. Not because I wanted praise, but because, despite everything, this was family. Plus, it felt good to take control of something where I could be recognized, if only subtly. I didn't expect my parents to be silent about it, though. Sarah leaned a little closer again, her voice low but urgent. I wasn't supposed to know this. Mark thought it was better if no one knew who was paying for this wedding. He said you wanted it that way. I nodded slightly, keeping my voice calm. I did. Why? She pressed. Why hide it? I glanced around the room, taking in the faces. Because if they knew, this would have turned into another competition for attention. And I'm tired of competing. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. I get it. Meanwhile, the subtle shift in the room was undeniable. My parents were visibly uncomfortable now. My father cleared his throat loudly, drawing attention back to himself. Lisa, he said, his voice tight, this is quite a surprise. I don't remember you offering to finance this event. I met his gaze evenly. That's because I didn't want to make it about me. My mother sniffed, crossing her arms. Mark's wedding should have been a family affair, not a business transaction. I held back a sigh. I'm family. and I didn't see anyone else stepping up. The words seemed to land harder than I expected. The room grew quieter. Even Mark noticed the tension and looked over, confused. "What's going on?" he asked, smiling awkwardly. My father jumped in quickly. "Nothing, son. Just a little family surprise." Mark shrugged and returned to his guests, but I could tell the damage was done. The rest of the evening was a strange mix of forced smiles and cold stares. Sarah was polite but distant, like she was rethinking everything. My parents barely spoke to me again. My mother shot me sidelong looks that said loud and clear, "You don't belong here." At one point, my cousin Jenna, who has always been one of my harshest critics, approached me with a tight smile. "So, Lisa," she said, voice dripping with fake sweetness, "I guess we should all be thanking you for this little extravaganza." I looked her in the eye, calm but firm. Or maybe thanking Mark for marrying someone with a good head for money. Jenna blinked, clearly not expecting that. Later that night, I found myself alone in a quiet corner, replaying everything in my mind. I realized something fundamental. This wedding, this family, and all the years of feeling invisible, they were connected. They wanted to keep me small, to keep me silent. But now they'd seen me, and I wasn't going back. I hadn't yet told anyone the full story behind how I came to fund the wedding. It wasn't just a random act of generosity. It was the start of a plan. I'd been quietly buying up shares in the company my father co-founded years ago, the family business that everyone else thought would pass entirely to Mark. Most of the family assumed Mark was next in line to take over. They bragged about how he was the heir. But they didn't see me, and that was their biggest mistake. The money I'd invested wasn't charity. It was leverage. The night wound down, the guests started leaving, and the family began to disperse. But the tension in the air hadn't faded. If anything, it thickened. I sat at the back again, watching my father and Mark talking in hushed tones near the coat check. Their expressions were dark, like they were trying to figure out how to fix a problem they didn't see coming. Sarah caught my eye across the room and gave a small, almost apologetic nod. It was clear she was starting to understand that I wasn't just the overlooked sister. I was something else entirely. And that's when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We need to talk now." I didn't recognize the number, but the timing was suspicious. I slipped out quietly and checked the message again. "You're making waves. Your family won't stand for it. Meet me at the cafe down the street." My heart beat faster, but I was more curious than scared. Who was this? And what did they know? I left the wedding early under the guise of needing to rest. My excuse was met with raised eyebrows but no outright protest. The truth was, I wasn't ready to face the aftermath of the evening just yet. My mind was still swirling with the shock of Sarah's revelation and my family's stunned silence. I needed time to think. The cafe where I was told to meet was a quiet, unassuming place a few blocks from the venue. I arrived to find the place almost empty, just a few regulars nursing their drinks, and the low hum of soft jazz playing overhead. The kind of place where no one expected drama, which made it the perfect spot for what was about to happen. I sat down at a small table by the window and scanned the room, wondering who might be watching me. My phone buzzed again, a new message from the same unknown number. "Sit tight. I'm coming." My heart raced. Was this a family member? A business rival? Someone who knew about the money behind the wedding? More than anything, I was curious. The silence and secrecy surrounding the funding made it a powder keg, and I could feel it starting to ignite. A few minutes later, a woman walked in. She looked familiar but different, older than me, maybe late 40s, with sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing. She wore a tailored jacket and carried herself like she was used to being in control. As she approached, I recognized her immediately. Rachel, my father's longtime assistant and gatekeeper to all things family and business related. Rachel sat down without waiting for an invitation. "You're braver than I expected, Lisa," she said quietly, folding her hands on the table. "I'm not here to play games," I replied evenly. "If you have something to say, say it." Rachel studied me for a moment, then leaned in closer. "The family is upset. Your father, well, he's furious. This wedding was supposed to be a statement, a display of unity, power, and tradition. Instead, you've thrown a wrench in everything." I nodded slowly. "Good. Maybe they should rethink how they treat me." Rachel's lips twitched, almost a smile. "It's not just about treatment. Your father built this family's legacy with his own hands. He's watched you disappear into the background for years and finally decided to bring you into the fold, on his terms." I laughed softly. "On his terms? You mean the ones where I'm invisible?" Rachel's expression hardened. "It's more complicated than that. Your father sees you as a liability. You're smart, resourceful, And you've been quietly acquiring shares in the company for years. It's threatening him. I folded my arms, feeling a mix of satisfaction and frustration. Good. Maybe you should feel threatened. Maybe it's time for the family to stop treating me like a mistake. Rachel nodded approvingly. I admire your courage. But this path you're on? It's dangerous. The family will come after you, hard. You need to decide if you want to fight or back down. I don't back down, I said firmly. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table. This is for you, she said. It's everything you need to understand what's at stake. Financials, family agreements, everything your father didn't want you to see. I stared at the envelope, my pulse quickening. This was the key to unlocking the real power behind the family facade. The kind of information no one outside the inner circle was supposed to have. Back at home, I carefully spread out the papers on my kitchen table. The house was quiet, too quiet. The ticking of the clock was the only sound. I went through the documents page by page, uncovering years of hidden dealings, complicated ownership structures, and the reality of the family business that had been kept from me. The company wasn't just my father's pride, it was his kingdom. And Mark was supposed to be the heir apparent, groomed to take over everything. But here I was, sitting on a growing pile of shares that gave me real power. Quiet power, yes, but power nonetheless. It was no wonder my father was furious. This wasn't just a business move. It was a challenge to his control, to the narrative he'd built for decades. The next day, I went to work, but my mind was elsewhere. The family drama felt distant yet suffocating. I wasn't just fighting for recognition anymore. I was fighting for my place in a legacy that had tried to erase me. That evening, the phone rang. It was my mother. Lisa, she began, her voice sharp and cold. We need to talk. I braced myself. My mother rarely called unless she wanted to lecture or manipulate. This wedding, she continued, was supposed to bring us together. Instead, you've made a scene. You embarrassed Mark and your father. I stayed silent for a moment before responding. I didn't embarrass anyone. I showed up. I helped. I'm here. Her laugh was short and bitter. You're here because we tolerate you. Don't forget that. That cut deeper than anything else. Later that week, family gatherings became tense. Conversations halted when I entered the room. Glances were exchanged, whispers started, and I felt the walls closing in. At one such dinner, Mark cornered me. Why are you doing this, Lisa? He asked, voice low but firm. Why fund the wedding without telling anyone? Why buy shares behind our backs? I'm not hiding anymore, I said quietly. I'm tired of being invisible. This family acts like I don't matter, but I do. He scoffed. You think you can just waltz in and take what's ours? This isn't a game. It's not a game to me, I replied. It's my life. His eyes flashed with anger. You're making a huge mistake. As days passed, the subtle war intensified. My parents started to freeze me out completely. Invitations stopped coming, conversations turned cold, and even Sarah's polite nods vanished. One afternoon, Rachel showed up at my door again, this time with a different tone. Your father is planning something, she warned. He's not going to let this slide. Be careful. Her words lingered in my mind like a warning shot. The frost between us was no longer subtle. I could feel the chill in every glance, every unspoken word when I showed up at family events, which were now rare and grudgingly extended. Invitations to dinners stopped coming altogether. Instead, I'd get passive-aggressive comments from my father's friends or cold looks from my mother if I happened to run into her at social gatherings. But I wasn't here to play their game by their rules anymore. I was here to change the game entirely. The first step was understanding the battlefield. That envelope Rachel handed me? It wasn't just papers. It was a map of every weakness the family had tried to hide. Ownership percentages, the company's financial struggles, secret loans, questionable contracts. It painted a picture of a family business that wasn't as untouchable as my father made it out to be. Mark, the golden son, had his own skeletons. Several risky deals had left parts of the company vulnerable, and those deals had never been shared with the board or with me. I now had the means to expose those mistakes. I started quietly reaching out to the company's other shareholders and key executives under the radar, building relationships without fanfare. I listened more than I spoke. People who had been ignored by my father's clique were eager for change, and I became their unexpected ally. When I attended company meetings, often uninvited, but never unwelcome thanks to my growing influence, I was the calm voice in the room, the one who asked questions others were afraid to ask. Why hadn't the board been informed about the risky deals? What was the plan to recover from the financial dips? Who else knew about these hidden contracts? My father tried to shut me down every time, his tone dripping with faux concern. "Lisa, this isn't your arena. Let the men handle this." But the more he tried to dismiss me, the more I pressed. I was meticulous. Every point I raised was backed by documents from the envelope Rachel gave me or by testimonies from other shareholders. I wasn't just causing ripples, I was making waves. At home, the tension grew unbearable. My mother's coldness deepened, turning into barely concealed disdain whenever we crossed paths. She stopped making small talk entirely and refused to acknowledge my accomplishments. At a family dinner meant to celebrate my niece's birthday, she deliberately ignored me, even when I tried to engage her in conversation. Mark, emboldened by my parents' silent support, became more aggressive. "You're making things worse," he said in a rare moment alone, voice low and sharp. "You don't belong here." "I belong wherever I want," I replied. "And I'm here to stay." He sneered but said nothing more. Behind the scenes, I quietly purchased more shares every week, using a shell company to avoid detection. Each new purchase gave me more leverage, slowly tipping the scales. Then came the day I called a surprise shareholders meeting. The boardroom was tense when I arrived. My father sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable but clearly wary. Mark was beside him, arms crossed, trying to look unimpressed but failing. "I called this meeting," I began, "because it's time for transparency." I laid out the company's precarious financial status, highlighting deals Mark had made without disclosure. I pointed out conflicts of interest and questionable contracts that put the company's future at risk. The room grew silent. My father's face flushed, his composure cracking for the first time. "This is a family business," he growled. "You're attacking your own." "No," I said calmly. "I'm protecting it." Several shareholders nodded in agreement. Whispers filled the room about leadership changes. That night, the family's true colors emerged. My parents called a meeting at the house, but this time it wasn't to celebrate or chat. It was a showdown. "You've embarrassed us," my mother hissed. "You're tearing the family apart." "I'm trying to save it," I said firmly. My father stepped closer, his eyes cold. "You're reckless, Lisa. If you push any further, you'll lose everything." I met his gaze without flinching. "I've already lost your approval. I'm not afraid to lose you." The following weeks were a battle of wills. My father and Mark tried everything: whisper campaigns, attempts to buy back my shares, even threats veiled as concern. But I held steady. I had allies now, people who wanted change and respected my vision. Then came the most daring move. At the annual general meeting, I presented a vote of no confidence in my father's leadership. I laid out a plan for new management, financial reforms, and transparency measures. The room was electric. The vote was close, but I won. My father's reaction was swift and venomous. That night, the family dinner was explosive. "You've ruined everything," he spat. I looked around the table at my stunned relatives. "No," I said. "I've saved what matters." The weeks after the vote of no confidence were the darkest and most revealing of all. My father's facade cracked completely. The man who once ruled with an iron grip was reduced to bitter snarls and desperate power plays. Mark became even more reckless, lashing out at anyone who showed me any respect. At family events, if I even appeared in the same room, the atmosphere thickened with hostility. My mother, once the queen of polite dismissals, now openly glared at me, her eyes filled with cold fury. She stopped pretending that the family was whole. It was obvious now that they saw me as a threat, an outsider who had overthrown their carefully built kingdom. But I had one advantage they didn't: control. Quiet, firm, and growing. After the board meeting, I was appointed as interim CEO, a position I intended to make permanent. I began restructuring the company, cutting ties with shady contractors Mark had favored, renegotiating contracts that put us at risk, and most importantly, opening transparent communication with all shareholders and employees. Every decision I made was deliberate, built to rebuild what had been weakened by years of arrogance and mismanagement. The company responded well, profits slowly rose, and morale improved. My father, relegated to a figurehead position, seethed in silence. He tried to use his remaining influence to sabotage my efforts, but his old allies quietly slipped away, unwilling to cross the new tide. At home, my parents' bitterness was palpable. They stopped inviting me to family gatherings, opting instead to have private dinners without me, which I learned about through mutual acquaintances. Sarah, Mark's fiancée, distanced herself once the shock of the wedding night passed, wary of being caught in the crossfire. The final blow came quietly, as most of the best revenge does. One evening, I received a call from the company's legal department. A confidential report had surfaced, revealing several instances of financial misconduct involving my father and Mark. Embezzlement, favoritism in awarding contracts, and attempts to funnel company resources into personal accounts. The evidence was strong, meticulously documented, and undeniable. I called a special shareholders meeting to present the findings. The room was packed, and this time, there was no doubt where loyalty lay. My father and Mark were forced to resign from the board immediately. The family legacy, once their fortress, had crumbled. As for the family, I cut ties completely. I refused to attend any more dinners where my presence was unwelcome, stopped answering calls from my parents, and ignored passive-aggressive messages from Mark. Their attempts to drag me back into their toxic orbit failed because I had grown beyond their reach. Today, the company thrives under my leadership. I am no longer the overlooked sister or the invisible daughter. I am the one steering the ship, and I've built a team who respects and supports me. My family. They are a cautionary tale, reminders of what happens when entitlement and greed go unchecked. I don't forgive them. I don't forget. Because some battles are about more than winning. They are about finally being seen. My name's Nolan, I'm 34, and I've been married to my wife Elise for almost 7 years. We've had our share of ups and downs like most couples, but overall, I'd say our relationship has been strong, built on mutual respect, quiet routines, and a shared appreciation for not making life harder than it needs to be. I've never been flashy. I'm not the loudest guy in the room, and I don't feel the need to constantly prove myself. That's probably why some people think they can walk all over me. Especially Elise's mother, Barbara. Now, let me just say, I don't hate my mother-in-law. At least, I didn't used to. I always assumed she was just one of those strong personality types. She never outright insulted me in the early years, but there was always this tone, a subtle edge to her voice when she said my name. Backhanded compliments, the kind you're supposed to laugh off even though they stick to your ribs like glue. Oh, Nolan, you're so laid back. It's amazing Elise can get you to do anything. Or, it must be nice not having the pressure of a real job. At first, I chalked it up to generational differences. Barbara was a career woman back in the day, corporate shark type, retired now, but still carries herself like she's running a boardroom. She wore pantsuits to brunch. Elise used to laugh it off and say her mom was just intense. I figured if Elise could handle it, so could I. We live in a modest but comfortable house in a quiet suburb just outside the city. The kind of place where the neighbors wave but don't pry, and everyone keeps their grass just a little too perfect. What most people don't know, what even Elise didn't fully realize at first, is that I come from money. Not mansion in Beverly Hills money, but enough. My grandfather was a contractor who invested in real estate before it was trendy. When he passed, the properties he left behind went into a trust. My dad managed it for years before handing the reins to me. So no, I don't have a 9 to 5. I don't clock in. I don't wear a tie. But I work. I manage tenants. I handle renovations, inspections, property taxes. I just do it from home, in jeans and a hoodie, with a spreadsheet open and a phone to my ear. Barbara never saw it that way. It really started after Barbara had knee surgery last year. It was supposed to be routine, but she took longer than expected to bounce back. Elise, being the generous soul she is, offered her mom our guest room while she recovered. A few weeks, she said, just until she's back on her feet. I wasn't thrilled about it. Barbara's the kind of guest who comments on the dust on the baseboards, but I agreed. Family's family. A few weeks turned into a few months, then into a full year. Barbara made herself right at home. She stocked our pantry with her specific brand of herbal tea and gluten-free crackers, took over the sunroom as her private reading lounge, and left sticky notes around the house reminding us to keep surfaces clean and turn off lights in unused rooms. It was like living with a passive-aggressive Alexa, but I held my tongue. Elise was stressed enough. She was pulling long shifts at the hospital, she's a nurse, and the last thing she needed was me starting a cold war with her mother. I kept to my routines, managed my properties, made coffee every morning, folded laundry, paid bills. I didn't need validation from Barbara. I figured as long as Elise and I were good, that's all that mattered. But over time, I started noticing small changes. Elise began parroting some of Barbara's little comments. Maybe you should try getting out of the house more. You've got time to spare. Why not try freelancing or something? Don't you miss the structure of a real job? I knew where this was coming from. Barbara had always equated productivity with office culture. She couldn't wrap her head around the fact that I wasn't stressed out and sleep-deprived, that I didn't punch a clock or attend Monday meetings. It didn't matter that I was covering 70% of our household bills, or that the rental property I just renovated would bring in another passive income stream for years. She saw me in sweats and assumed I was doing nothing. Still, I stayed quiet. Until last weekend. It was a Sunday. Elise had just finished her third night shift in a row and was passed out in our bedroom. I was making eggs in the kitchen when Barbara walked in, dressed like she was about to go lecture at an Ivy League symposium. She gave my outfit, shorts and a t-shirt, a once-over, and wrinkled her nose. You know, she said casually, like she was commenting on the weather, it's really something how you've managed to avoid full-time employment this long. Must be nice having a wife who supports you. I froze, spatula mid-flip. Come again. She smiled. That tight, smug smile that never reached her eyes. Oh, don't take it the wrong way, Nolan. I just mean, it's unusual these days. Most men would feel a little embarrassed not contributing equally. I laughed, but it came out more like a scoff. Barbara, I pay most of the bills. She raised an eyebrow. Do you? That's not what Elise said. She mentioned you've been, between things. Projects was it? She practically tasted the word like it was something sour. I clenched my jaw. I wanted to say so much, but I didn't. Not yet. Look, she continued, pulling a chair out and sitting down like this was a scheduled intervention. I'm not trying to criticize. But if you're going to be living under this roof rent-free, the least you could do is pick up more of the financial slack. Or start paying rent. It's only fair. That's when I turned to face her fully. There was no anger in me, just a calm, quiet disbelief. The kind that simmers beneath the surface, right before something big breaks. Barbara, I said, keeping my voice steady. Do you know whose name is on the deed to this house? She blinked. What? This house? I said, gesturing around us. Do you know whose name is on the title? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was loud enough. That was the first time I saw her smile falter. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I didn't do it right away. I let her words simmer for a few days. Barbara's little speech about pulling my weight echoed in my mind every time I passed her smug face in the hallway. She acted like she hadn't said anything unusual, just a totally reasonable observation from a concerned mother. Elise didn't bring it up either, which made me wonder if Barbara had said more behind my back. The tension thickened into something unspoken and heavy, like fog that never quite cleared. And beneath it, something inside me started to shift. It wasn't just the insult. It was the entitlement. The way Barbara lived in my house like she owned the place. The way she rearranged my kitchen drawers without asking, snooped through our pantry, corrected how I folded my own clothes. The way she'd started referring to our home as Elise's house when talking to friends on the phone, like I was some long-term house guest. All while I paid the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the taxes. And what made it worse was Elise, my Elise, was beginning to crack under her mother's influence. I noticed it in small ways at first. Little things. Elise stopped asking me about my day. Stopped offering to cook dinner on her nights off. She became shorter with me, quicker to sigh, quicker to say, I'm just tired, when I asked if everything was okay. I knew she was under pressure. Her job wasn't easy, but this was different. She'd been tired before. This felt like she was slowly pulling away from me, like someone whispering poison in her ear. I knew who that someone was. The breaking point didn't happen all at once. It was more like a steady leak that suddenly turned into a flood. It started with the groceries. One Saturday morning, I went to make coffee and found the cabinet empty. No beans. No filters. Just a yellow sticky note. Nolan, if you want a specific brand, maybe start buying your own. I stared at that note for a full minute. My hands trembled slightly, not from anger, but from the sheer absurdity of it. I did buy the groceries. Barbara hadn't contributed a single dollar. Yet here she was, drawing territorial lines like a teenager claiming shelf space in a dorm. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I drove to the store, bought the coffee, bought everything I normally stocked. Then, just to spite her, I bought the exact brand of herbal tea she obsessed over and put it back on the shelf without restocking hers. Petty? Maybe. But it felt good. The next week, I noticed my car keys had been moved. I always kept them on the little hook by the door, but I found them on the counter. I didn't think much of it until I checked the mileage later. Barbara had used my car. Not Elise's. Mine. Without asking. I confronted her, and she laughed. I didn't think you'd mind. You're home all day anyway. I told her not to do it again. Her smile didn't budge. You're being very territorial, Nolan. That's not a good look for someone who doesn't pay rent. That word again. Rent. Like she forgot, or pretended to forget, this wasn't just Elise's house. It was mine. Legally. On paper. Signed and filed under my name. That night, Elise barely said 2 words to me. I asked her what was going on. She shrugged. Maybe you could try being more understanding. She's my mom, Nolan. I am being understanding, I said. She's living in our home, my home, for free. And now she's using my car. Without asking. She just needed to run an errand. Then she can ask. That's what normal people do. Elise didn't respond. She turned over in bed and pulled the covers over her shoulder. I lay awake for hours. That's when I started wondering. How much of this was Barbara's doing? And how much of it was Elise simply choosing to side with her? The next morning, things escalated. I came downstairs to find Barbara rearranging my office. Not Elise's, mine. She'd moved my laptop to the dining room table, boxed up my pens, shifted my books to a cabinet, and left another sticky note. This room has much better natural light. Perfect for yoga. Hope you don't mind. I stood there stunned. This wasn't passive aggression anymore. This was a direct statement. You don't matter here. Elise, I called, trying to stay calm. Can we talk for a second? We sat down at the table. I kept my voice level. I laid it all out. The keys, the coffee, the office, the remarks, the notes. I feel like I'm being erased in my own house, I said. She's crossing every boundary, and you're letting her. Elise didn't look angry. She looked tired. She's just trying to help, Nolan. You know how she is. She's used to being in charge. But this isn't her house. Elise didn't respond right away. Then she said something that punched the breath out of me. Well, technically it's mine too. I stared at her. What does that mean? I just mean, you don't have to make everything about ownership. We're married. We share things. This is our home. Our home. Suddenly, I realized what Barbara had done. She'd twisted the narrative. Erased me from the equation. I wasn't a provider anymore. I was a dependent. Over the next week, things got worse. Barbara started holding court in the living room, inviting friends over, my living room, while I was working. Loud voices, tea, gossip. When I asked her to keep it down, she gave me that same damn smile. I didn't realize you were doing anything important, Nolan. I thought you were just watching YouTube. Elise didn't defend me. That Friday, Elise had a friend over, Amy, one of her nursing coworkers. The 3 of us sat down for a casual dinner. I tried to stay out of it, but Barbara couldn't help herself. You know, she said to Amy, her tone light and breezy. It's amazing how well Elise does supporting the household. All that overtime, and she still comes home and cooks. I blinked. I cook too. Barbara laughed like I'd just made a charming joke. Oh, I'm sure you try. Elise didn't laugh, but she didn't speak up either. Then Barbara dropped it. In fact, I told Elise she should start asking you for rent. It might motivate you to find a real job. Amy looked horrified. I didn't respond. I just stood up and walked out. I didn't sleep that night. My thoughts spun like a carousel I couldn't get off. I kept thinking, this isn't my marriage anymore. It's theirs. I'm just the third wheel. The invisible man in my own house. But it wasn't until 2 days later that the betrayal truly landed. I was on my laptop in the bedroom, trying to update tenant reports, when I saw the email. It was from our bank, a notification about a co-ownership inquiry. Someone had attempted to add a second name to the deed of the house. I stared at it for a solid 10 minutes. Cold spread across my chest. I walked downstairs. Elise was folding laundry on the couch. Barbara was reading in the armchair. Elise, I said slowly, did you try to add your name to the house title? She looked up, startled. What? The bank sent me an alert. There was a request. You listed me as the current sole owner. Which? I am. She flushed. I didn't think it would be a big deal. We're married. I just thought it made sense. No, I said, voice hardening. You didn't think it made sense. Someone put that idea in your head. Barbara didn't even look up from her book. Well, it is common. Most wives are listed on the property after marriage. It's not that unusual. I turned to her slowly. And I'm sure it's just a coincidence you brought up rent last week. Just a coincidence you've been acting like this is your house for months. Elise stood up. Nolan, you're overreacting. You're making this into something it's not. No, I said, backing away. You already did that. I left the room. I didn't leave the house. Not yet. But something inside me snapped. Whatever trust one had left in Elise, whatever patience I'd been clinging to with Barbara, it all crumbled in that moment. And that's when I decided, if they wanted to play power games, they were going to lose. Because this wasn't their house. It was mine. And I had every intention of reminding them exactly what that meant. But not with yelling. Not with drama. With silence. With paperwork. With a plan. When I tell you the days that followed were the darkest I've had in years, I'm not exaggerating. There's something deeply hollowing about realizing the person you thought was on your team has, little by little, crossed over to the other side. Elise hadn't just ignored the warning signs. She'd become part of the problem. And I, the guy who'd kept everything running behind the scenes, had somehow been painted as the freeloader. I didn't confront her again after the deed attempt. I didn't see the point. Anything I said would have been twisted or brushed off as overreaction. I could feel the weight of Barbara's presence in every room, every breath, like she'd wedged herself between us, and Elise couldn't see it. Or didn't want to. Instead, I pulled back. Quietly. I stopped joining them for dinner. I started waking up earlier and taking my breakfast to the back porch before anyone else stirred. I moved my laptop setup to the garage, where I dusted off an old table and repurposed it as my new workspace. It was cold in the mornings, but I liked it that way. The silence helped me think. I kept to myself, answered emails, handled rental inspections, even started talking to a few contractors about a new duplex I'd been eyeing out in Fairview. And all the while, neither of them noticed I'd gone quiet. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. That part hurt more than I expected. I hit my low point 2 weeks after the deed incident, during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd come home early from a tenant meeting. One of the upstairs units had a leak, and I stepped inside just as Barbara and Elise were sitting in the living room, deep in conversation over tea. I paused in the foyer when I heard my name. I just don't know what he does all day, Barbara was saying. He acts like he's managing a company, but what's he really building? Where's the ambition? Elise sighed. I don't know, Mom. Sometimes I feel like he's just coasting. Coasting. That word stuck like a splinter. I turned and walked right back out the door before they saw me. Drove aimlessly for an hour. Just enough time for the sun to start dipping low, casting that gold haze across the streets that usually made me feel calm. Not this time. Not after hearing my own wife talk about me like I was dead weight. After everything I'd done for us. For her. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the pull-out couch in the garage, my new sleeping space, and stared at the ceiling. My mind spun through every sacrifice, every moment I'd bit my tongue, every bill I'd paid without a thank you. And then, sometime around 4 a.m., a new feeling settled in. Resolve. I may have hit bottom, but the one upside of hitting the floor is that there's nowhere left to fall. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I'd let things slide too far. I'd let people write my story for me. That ended now. So I started building. Not revenge. Not yet. That would come later. First, I had to rebuild me. I got up that morning and made a list, just a simple doc on my phone. Titled it, Operation Take My Life Back. Corny? Maybe. But I needed something to keep me focused. First item, secure independence. Second, grow the business. Third, decide what kind of life I actually want. That day, I called up a real estate attorney I trusted, Miss Kelsey Moran. She'd helped me with a tricky tenant lawsuit a couple years back and knew her stuff. We set up a meeting. I told her everything. About the house, the title, the attempt to add Elise's name without consent, the living situation. She was sharp as ever. Nolan, she said, tapping her pen against the desk. This isn't just messy. It's dangerous. You need to protect your assets. Can I evict them? I asked hesitantly. She paused. Technically, yes. It's your house. But legally, given your marriage, you'd be wading into complex waters if you do it wrong. I suggest we take it step by step. She helped me draft a notice of ownership clarification, basically a formal statement that I was the sole legal owner and that no attempts to modify the deed had been approved. We filed it with the county and had copies notarized. Nothing aggressive, just a paper trail, a quiet warning. Next, I started making moves on the business side. I'd been managing 6 properties at that point, but always on a modest scale. I'd let them run themselves, minimal overhead, reliable tenants, safe choices. But now I wanted more. I took meetings with other property owners, asked around about investment opportunities, started working 12-hour days, not out of desperation, but out of drive. For the first time in months, I felt clear-headed, awake. In just a few weeks, I bought into a duplex with a partner I trusted and scoped out a second unit in a transitioning neighborhood. Riskier? Sure, but with high reward potential. I rewrote my business website, updated all my listings, even hired a part-time assistant to handle tenant requests. It felt good, really good. Meanwhile, at home, Barbara and Elise barely noticed the shift. They thought I was sulking. Barbara would toss me the occasional snide remark when I came in late. Long day at the couch office? And Elise would barely look up from her phone. I didn't bite. Instead, I started recording everything. Not secretly, just responsibly. I tracked expenses, documented every conversation that involved the house, rent, or financial contributions. Not to weaponize, but to protect. If things went sideways, I needed proof. And I had a growing suspicion that things would go sideways. Eventually. But the more I rebuilt my life, the less I feared it. One day, I ran into Amy, Elise's coworker, at the grocery store. She looked awkward at first, like she didn't know if she should speak. But then she smiled. "Hey, Nolan. You doing okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Better than I've been in a while, actually." She hesitated. I wanted to say, "I thought what Barbara said at dinner was out of line. You didn't deserve that." I nodded. "Thanks. I appreciate that." She glanced at her cart. "If it means anything, I always thought you carried yourself with a lot of quiet strength." Elise used to talk about that. I don't know what's going on now, but I hope she remembers that too. That comment stuck with me longer than I expected. Because Amy had seen it. The real me. The guy I was before Barbara moved in and warped everything. And that made me realize I wasn't the one who'd changed. I was the same person. I'd just let myself get too quiet. Too passive. That was over now. Back at home, the energy had shifted. Elise and Barbara still chatted and laughed, but there was tension underneath it. Barbara had started asking probing questions, like whether I'd changed the Wi-Fi password I had, or if I was up to something in the garage. I smiled every time. I wasn't being petty, I was being smart. Calculated. Then came the moment that told me I was truly on the right path. It was a Sunday. Elise came into the garage while I was reviewing blueprints for a new property. She hovered in the doorway. "Hey," she said. "We haven't really talked lately." I nodded. "We haven't." She looked around awkwardly. "You've been busy." "I have." She shifted her weight. "I talked to my mom. She thinks maybe we should set some boundaries. About space. And expectations." I waited. She said she might look into getting her own place soon. Said she feels like she's overstayed. I nearly laughed. Not because of the words, but because I knew Barbara hadn't decided that. She felt it. Felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She'd sensed that I was no longer passive. That her position wasn't permanent. "Okay," I said. "I think that's a good idea." Elise hesitated. "You're not mad?" I met her eyes. "No, but I've got a lot on my plate now. I don't have time for chaos." She nodded slowly. "You've changed." "I'm the same," I said, just finally acting like it. She left quietly after that. Didn't say much more. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to chase her. Or fix it. Or explain myself. Because I didn't need to. I had a plan. I had power. I had clarity. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It unfolded slowly, like an old blueprint I didn't realize I'd been sketching in the back of my mind for months. Every insult, every passive-aggressive comment, every boundary crossed, it all stacked neatly into rows like dominoes. And now, I was finally ready to knock them down. But not in anger. That was key. I wasn't fueled by rage anymore. That was the old me. The Nolan who sat quiet at family dinners while his mother-in-law called him unemployed with a glass of wine in her hand and a smirk on her face. The Nolan who bit his tongue while his wife of 7 years casually asked the bank to put her name on his property like it was a birthday gift. No, this was something different. This was strategy. The first step was information. I went back through every financial document I had, every property title, mortgage contract, rental agreement, utility bill. I combed through it all with a highlighter and sticky notes. I made copies and stored them in a lockbox in the garage. Just in case. The house we lived in? Fully paid off, no mortgage. Bought it outright, 3 years ago after selling a duplex that had tripled in value over the pandemic. The title was in my name only. Always had been. Elise knew that, in the beginning. But after Barbara moved in, she started acting like it was a joint asset just because we were married. That's not how property law works in our state. Not if it's acquired before marriage. And certainly not if there's clear documentation to back it up. Which there was. I made sure of it. Second step? Setting the stage. I knew Barbara was getting restless. She felt the energy shift, even if she couldn't explain it. She started hovering around me more, asking what I was working on, peeking into the garage when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She hated not being in control. She thrived on knowing more than everyone else in the room, and now she was flying blind. So I gave her something to see. I started working more visibly, left folders open on the kitchen table, left my laptop screen angled just enough to show diagrams, spreadsheets, legal docs. She'd always enter the room with some excuse, getting tea, finding a charger, but her eyes lingered. She never asked directly, but I could tell it was eating at her. One day, I made a phone call while she was in the next room, on speaker. Yes, Mr. Kaplan, I'll be finalizing the documents this week. Yes, my attorney's already signed off. And yes, the tenants are aware of the transfer. We should close before the end of the quarter. I didn't even have a Mr. Kaplan. I made up the name on the spot. But Barbara perked up like a meerkat in tall grass. After that, she started asking Elise questions. Is Nolan selling the house? Why does he need a lawyer? Has he mentioned anything about moving? Elise would relay these things to me at night, cautiously, like she wasn't sure whose side she was supposed to be on anymore. Are you planning something? She finally asked one night as we lay in bed, backs barely touching. I'm always planning something, I replied softly. That answer didn't satisfy her, but I didn't feel the need to elaborate. By then, I'd already reached out to my tenants, dozens of them across 7 properties. I drafted a general update email about property management changes. Nothing alarming, just a heads up that their rent would now be handled by a newly formed LLC, Lockridge Property Group, named after my grandfather. It gave everything a clean break. Professional. Impersonal. But more importantly, it separated me from them. Nolan wasn't the guy fixing leaky sinks anymore. Nolan was the owner, the investor, the man behind the curtain. Then came the third step, controlling the narrative. Elise's birthday was coming up in a few weeks. She hadn't said much about it, but Barbara was already planning a family brunch. She loved putting on airs for Elise's friends, loved making the house look pristine and giving off the illusion of control. I offered to help, of course. Said I'd take care of the details. Ordered catering. Rented extra chairs. Even arranged for a cleaning service to come the day before. Barbara didn't trust it, of course. She was suspicious of how agreeable I'd become. But suspicion makes people sloppy. And I was counting on that. The fourth step? Gathering my allies. Now, I don't have many close friends. I'm not that guy with a dozen drinking buddies and a weekend golf group. But the people I do trust? They're solid. One of them is Ray, my accountant and oldest friend. We've known each other since high school. Ray's not flashy. He's the kind of guy who wears khakis on his days off and uses coupons even when he doesn't need to. But he's smart. Quite smart. I invited Ray over under the guise of discussing business transitions. We sat in the garage, sipping black coffee while I laid it all out. The deed, the betrayal, the slow erosion of my role in my own marriage. Ray listened without interrupting. Then, after a long pause, he said, "So what's the move?" And I told him. I was going to let Barbara walk straight into her own downfall. I was going to give her the illusion of control, let her strut around like she owned the place, just long enough to make her comfortable. And then I was going to take it all back. But to do that, I needed everything lined up. Not just legally. Emotionally. I needed Elise to see it. Not just hear it. Not just read it. See it. Because right now, she was still under the fog. Still half convinced that Barbara was the voice of reason and I was the moody, prideful husband who couldn't take a joke. I had to crack that illusion wide open, and I had to do it in a way that couldn't be spun or softened. Ray nodded slowly. You're walking a fine line. I know, I said, but I'm done playing the quiet guy. He clapped me on the shoulder. Then let's do it right. Together, we finalized a few critical documents, created a paper trail, scheduled a meeting with Ms. Moran, my attorney, to update my will and revise my estate holdings, just in case. And I started moving certain assets out of reach. Small steps. Calculated. I took a week off from house duties entirely. Let Barbara run the place. Let her get comfortable again. I even let Elise believe things were calming down. She started smiling more, cooking dinner again, initiating conversations in the evening. I didn't buy into it. Not anymore. But I let her think I did. Because the final act was almost here. Elise's birthday brunch was the perfect stage. All her friends, a few of her co-workers, even some distant cousins were invited. I made sure the house looked spotless. I rented matching dishware, set out candles, bought her a gift, a framed photo of us from our honeymoon, back when things were still real. Barbara preened like a peacock that morning, wore a pastel dress and pearls, directed the cleaning crew like she was the Queen of Versailles. I stayed out of her way, let her feel in charge, and as guests started to arrive, I stayed in the background. Polite, cordial, quiet, but ready. By the time brunch officially started, the house was full. Elise's friends crowded the living room with pastel gift bags and polite smiles. Co-workers from the hospital clustered near the kitchen island swapping stories, and a couple of Barbara's country club acquaintances perched stiffly on the edge of the couch like they were attending a staged photo shoot rather than a birthday. The air smelled like catered pastries and coffee, and under it all sat that familiar tension, the kind you don't notice unless you're the one it's aimed at. I moved quietly through the room, refilling cups, smiling when spoken to, saying almost nothing. Barbara, on the other hand, was in her element. She floated from group to group, laughing just a little too loud, telling people how exhausted Elise had been from supporting the household lately, how proud she was of her daughter for carrying so much responsibility. I caught more than one glance aimed at me afterward, sympathetic, confused, judgmental. I didn't react. I checked my watch instead. When everyone had finally settled with plates in their hands and Elise stood near the dining table opening gifts, I nodded to Ray, who was standing quietly near the back hallway like a guest no one had really clocked yet. Ms. Moran arrived moments later, right on time. She was dressed simply, carrying a slim leather folder under her arm, and she gave me a brief nod of acknowledgement before taking a seat. Barbara noticed her immediately. "And who might you be?" Barbara asked brightly, her smile tight. "A friend of Nolan's," Ms. Moran said politely. Barbara's eyes flicked to me, suspicious, but she turned back just as Elise finished opening her last present. The room erupted in applause. Someone tapped a glass for a speech. Barbara beat them to it. "I'll say a few words," she announced, already standing. "Because this day is about my daughter and everything she's done for this family." I felt Elise tense beside me. Barbara launched into it. How Elise had always been the responsible one, the driven one, how she'd built a career, how she kept everything together. Then, almost casually, she slid the knife in. "And of course," she said, smiling sweetly, "not everyone contributes the same way. But Elise, in her generosity, has never complained, even when she's been carrying more than her share." The room went quiet in that brittle, uncomfortable way people get when they realize they've just been invited into someone else's marriage without their consent. Elise looked down at her hands. My moment had arrived. I stepped forward calmly. No raised voice. No shaking hands. "You're right, Barbara," I said evenly. "Let's talk about contributions." Her smile faltered just barely. "Well, if you insist." "I insist," I said. I turned toward the room. "For those of you who don't know, I've been accused, repeatedly, of being unemployed, of living here rent-free, of being financially dependent on my wife." A ripple of unease moved through the guests. "So I think it's only fair," I continued, "that everyone hears the truth." Barbara laughed lightly. "Nolan, this really isn't the time. The house," I said, cutting through her words without raising my voice, "is titled solely in my name. Fully paid off. I purchased it 3 years ago with proceeds from a real estate portfolio I manage. I cover the majority of the household expenses, utilities, taxes, insurance, maintenance, groceries, all of it." Barbara stared at me. "And since we're talking about rent," I added, finally turning to face her directly, "you've been living here for over a year without paying a single dollar." The silence was so sharp it rang. Barbara blinked. "That's not. And the country home you moved into before that," I continued. "The one you've been in for almost 4 years now." Now her smile vanished completely. "What are you talking about?" I nodded to Ms. Moran. She stood and opened her folder. "Barbara Sutton," she said clearly, The residential property located on Glenwood Drive in Fairview has been in Nolan Lockridge's ownership since 2019 under a family trust transfer. A collective inhale swept the room. You've been living there rent-free as well, Ms. Moran continued. No lease. No tenant agreement. No payments recorded. Nolan has covered the property taxes and upkeep the entire time. Barbara's face drained of color. That's impossible, she whispered. That house was arranged for me through an associate. False, Ms. Moran said gently. The deed is very clear. Barbara turned slowly toward me, eyes wide. You never corrected you? I said quietly. No, because you never asked. You just assumed. I turned to the room again. So when she demanded that I start paying rent, when she mocked me as unemployed, she was doing it inside 2 properties that she herself did not pay for. Murmurs broke out instantly. People shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered Elise's name. Elise was staring at me now, truly seeing me for the first time in months. Her eyes were wet, her face pale. You knew? She asked softly. All this time. I didn't hide it, I said just as softly. I just didn't broadcast it. I never thought I'd need to. Barbara stumbled back into her chair. This is ambush, she hissed. You blindsided me in front of everyone. No, I replied calmly. You tried to humiliate me in front of everyone. I just told the truth in the same room. Ms. Moran stepped forward again. There is also the matter of a recent attempt to modify the deed on this residence. That attempt was denied and documented. Further attempts will be considered fraudulent. All eyes went to Elise. She looked stricken. Mom told me it was normal. She said it was just paperwork. Barbara stood abruptly. Because it is normal. You are his wife. And you are not his landlord, Ms. Moran said evenly. The room felt like it was tilting. I never wanted this to be public, I said finally, voice steady. But I'm done being erased in my own home and in my own marriage. Elise's breath hitched. Nolan, I love you, I said. But I will not be diminished for your mother's comfort. Barbara tried to speak again, but the room had already shifted against her. No one met her eyes now. The women who had been nodding along with her earlier looked away. Her power, the social kind she thrived on, was gone. That evening, after the guests left in awkward clusters, the house felt hollow. Barbara retreated to the guest room without a word. Elise sat at the kitchen table in silence. I didn't know, she said finally. I believe you, I said. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted you to choose me without being forced. Tears slid down her face. I failed you. I said nothing. Some realizations have to settle on their own. Barbara moved out within the week. There were no dramatic goodbyes. No apologies. Just suitcases rolling down the front steps and a final, furious look thrown over her shoulder when she realized no one was chasing after her. A month later, Elise asked me if we could start over. Counseling. Boundaries. Space from her mother. All of it. I agreed, but differently than before. With expectations. With clarity. With equal footing. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't rebuilding from the bottom anymore. I was finally standing on the truth.